should be live now. Welcome. Let me know if the volume is okay or if I need to change it. Welcome to all the Node.js Express you need in a single live. Should be live. I'm gonna remove that immediately. I'm Alex, the entrepreneur. I've been teaching basically for a full year now as a private code mentor, and the last 9 months I've dedicated to teaching Strapi. So you may be asking yourself, why is the Strapi guy teaching Node.js? And the answer is so I can take it off the list. I just spent a day, a weekend just coding up a Node.js app, and my goal with this is to just basically teach, do a brain dump of all of the teachings, all of the things that I had to go through in order to teach that. I'm gonna be starting the quote-unquote lecture in 15 minutes, so that I start at 8 p.m. CET, but I'll be hanging out for the next few minutes in case you wanna chat, you have specific questions, or you just wanna hang out. Just gonna be hanging out. I took this also as an opportunity to use a new tool for live streaming called Streamlabs OBS, which is the one that some Twitch streamers use, and I thought it would be cool to just try it out. So that's what I'm doing, and I'll start with the presentation in a few minutes. However, if you have any question, you can ask them, and you can also check the description to see the code that we're gonna be writing. And I'm gonna, I guess, send a couple of recommendations. The main recommendation will be to download Node.js at nodejs.org and download Visual Studio Code at code.visualstudio.com, and lastly download PG Postgres at postgresql.org. So you can click on download and you're gonna have access to it. We're gonna be using pgadmin 4, and we're gonna basically touch upon using Postgres, using Next, all of that nice stuff, so that we can build CRUD APIs that use databases. We're also gonna get into authentication. So if you're excited, let me know. If you have any quick question in the meantime, I'm gonna be happy to answer them. Hi Flavian, how you doing? And the estimated timeline for this presentation is going to be about 2 hours, 3 hours, more likely 3 hours. The first 5 points we're going to cover in 20 minutes. The remaining 3 points is going to take quite a while. And my goal is to just build enough frustration in you with dealing with the templating engine, so that you're going to realize that your best course of action after learning the basics of Node.js is to just learn a single page application framework. That's basically my goal with this entire thing. And then maybe we're going to do a follow-up stream. If you're interested in that, we're going to do a follow-up stream on using full-stack React with Node.js, which will be the next step. Hey, Andrew, good to see you. And that will be the next step. So let me know in the comments if you're interested in that. Put a like in the video, subscribe if you haven't, and make sure to use the comment section to let me know any other topic you may want me to cover, or just to, you know, say hello, thank me, or whatever. Just, you know, type the date so that YouTube sees a bunch of activity. Awesome, awesome. I've yet to go to Canada, but I'd love to visit. It's gonna get really hot in here because I don't have air conditioning, so bear with me. But you know, if you want to check the repo for the code, it's going to be at my repo, gallo.sballo / all the Node.js and Express you need. And this is basically what we're going to be building. But my main goal is to show you a bunch of milestones. So I'm going to get you through every specific step as we build it. Happy to help, Flavian. Happy to cover Strapi. I'm going to be covering more Strapi in the future. I just decided to do this one to take it off my bucket list, so that way you have a Node.js tutorial from me. I actually used to have it. I'm happy that it helped you, Sandeep. Glad I could help. And I mean, honestly, if you're going to make more money with me helping you, or you're going to build something cool, that's basically why I do it. So I very much enjoy your success. And yeah, I got this little control panel here where I can change views and stuff, so I'll be playing around with this. And I also have another computer to look at the code, so that way I can show it. So hopefully we're not gonna, it's gonna be as engaging as I can. I'll try to make this as engaging as I can, go as fast as I can in the parts that I think are very trivial, and then I'll slow down in the other parts. I'll probably take a break when we get to dealing with database, so that all the viewers have time to set up their database if they can't. Honestly, the database part will be the part where we may have to do a little Google searches to find a bunch of solutions to problems that may arise. Although I have a collection of gotchas here in case I forget something, and I'm gonna have it on the other monitor so I see it. Beside that, if you wanna join in, you can download Node.js by going here in the Node.js website. Just click on download and you're good to go. And download Visual Studio Code and download PostgreSQL. I'll get to PostgreSQL later when we actually need it, but if you want to download it now, it's gonna save us time for later. So I'll start in 8 minutes, and then I'll have to figure out how to cut the rest of the part in the video. So if you have any quick question related to Strapi, I'll take it. Otherwise, we're gonna chill for the next few minutes and then we're gonna get started. So I'm seeing a couple of questions in the chat. I'm gonna answer them, and I also just write them in the comments. I'm seeing Sameh is asking, can I install Strapi with MySQL? You can. The answer is you can install Strapi with MySQL in a Docker container, and then you can configure. But the second you configure to use a PG database, you're gonna lose all of the data unless you migrate. So you probably will be better off using PG directly. Also, I believe that Heroku will not let you use a host that is not registered. So my recommendation will be to either start with Heroku or use Docker all the way. And as for Flavian, he's saying, how do I monitor my API? Actually, there's a company, I don't remember the name. Let me check it out. I think it's called RunScope. RunScope provides API monitoring solutions. They have a great t-shirt. I had this t-shirt since I started coding. That's why I remember them. And you can check, there's multiple professional solutions. Another thing you could do will be to monitor your logs. Strapi automatically produces a bunch of logs, so you can buy a log recording solution so that you can keep track of all of your logs, so that way you can monitor how the API is doing. Beside that, I think those two solutions are fairly effective. If you have any other quick question, you can ask it now. Otherwise, I'm gonna go to live scene. There we go. And I'm gonna invite you. If you wanna have a closer way to reach me, you can join me on Patreon/AlexTheEntrepreneur. And I've literally launched it today, so it's about to get populated because I'll invite all of my former students. So if you're a student of mine, by next week you're gonna get an invitation email with a link. So you're gonna be able to join our Discord server. Basically, there's gonna be a Discord for the entrepreneur community. There's gonna be a Discord for all of my students. So if you're a student of mine, you bought my course, you're immediately going to join. And then there's gonna be a Discord also for my alumni, which are actually for my mentees, people that actually code mentored. And this is gonna be a more exclusive one. So the alumni are gonna get they're gonna be able to join a free live stream every month. It's gonna be done for them. You can join the call and I'm gonna coach you live on YouTube, and you're gonna have access for that through the Discord, while my mentees are gonna receive mentoring every week. So they're gonna be able to join in a group coaching every week. They also get 1 hour call. Actually, you will get an hour call if you take the mentee offering here on Patreon, which I'm as familiar as you may be to it. So it's actually gonna be fairly hard to find. But basically, for $5 a month, you can join the Discord, and that way you can have text messaging with me. And for $97 a month, I'm gonna give you 1 hour of coaching, which is basically heavily discounted coaching. And you're also gonna be able to join one group call a week with other mentees. So if you're a mentee of mine, so you work with me on Code Mentor, you're gonna have this out of the box. You don't have to buy it. However, if you're interested in supporting me, you can join that way. And with that said, in this live, I'm just gonna do a presentation. So this is something that is coming up. So if you wanna support me, you can spend $5. You get access to the Discord. In a week from now, this Discord is probably gonna have a couple hundred people, as I have over 1,200 alumni and 500 mentees. So I would assume that at least 200 people will join. And as such, it's gonna be an interesting place to be for people that are working on their career and working on their applications. Looking forward to the great resources. Thank you for your support. I have a video on Docker. There's a video on Docker on my channel, so click on my name or right click on my name in YouTube and check the video section. There is a video on setting up Docker. However, I received some criticism on making it even more advanced, so maybe I'll do something later. However, as for plans for the future, I'm working on a Next.js course. It's going to be a premium course. I'm thinking of pricing it around $27 for the course, and I'll probably do some live streams, so there's going to be upper tiers. And my goal with that is to have a extremely fast paced, extremely advanced course that is audited. So like every single line of code is going to be code reviewed by some other programmer. So that way the code quality will be extremely high. It's going to be a professional setup. We're going to build e-commerces, CRUD applications, private logins. We're going to look about on static optimization, server-side optimization, all that nice stuff. And as such, it's going to be at a different price point compared to a Udemy course. However, I still have plans to support the Udemy course, as well as building maybe a Udemy course on Gatsby, maybe where we build a professional e-commerce in Gatsby, maybe a 12-hour course, something like that. But as of now, I'm focusing on Next.js, which I believe is what the people want. So that's what I'm trying to help with. I'm very happy to support you. At this point, I'm gonna get started with the Node.js intro. As I said, you can click in the link in the description if you wanna access the source code, so that way you can follow along. My goal with this source code is that even though the source code is done, so you can see the end of it, I'm actually gonna be building it step by step so that we have a clear goal at any time and you know what we're doing, so that we can mirror the process of learning Node.js. That's kind of my goal, is to get you from nothing to a point where you actually know how to code in Node.js and you're confident in building your APIs. Obviously, I can't cover everything because this live stream is going to last 2 to 3 hours. As such, there's going to be a lot of corners that I'm going to cut. There's going to be a lot of stuff that I'm going to leave on the side. And that's because I'm focusing on the stuff that I build every single day. So if you ask me what I build every day, is CRUD routes and authentication, and sometimes some templating engine. That's the stuff that I will build in every single project. And then the more specific stuff, you just have to figure out as you go. Ideally, this is a way for you to be introduced to Node.js or to just freshen up. And in a way, this is going to make you appreciate what Strapi does, because Strapi provides all of this with the exception of session, which is why this is worth watching, even if you love Strapi and you plan on only using Strapi. But a lot of stuff Strapi provides, and you're going to start appreciating the work that has been put into Strapi. So before I get started with coding, if you want to follow along and you don't have the tools, you can go on the web and search for nodejs.org, click on the LTS. The LTS is always the one you want to go for because it's supported by everything. You just click on it, you download it, and now if you open up your terminal, you should be able to see Node. So if you see Node, or if you type node-v and you see the version, you're good to go. I would recommend using an IDE. My IDE of choice is Visual Studio Code, although you can use whichever you prefer. And in an hour and a half, you'll be using PostgreSQL. So if you wanna get ahead, because otherwise we're gonna waste a lot of time downloading and installing PostgreSQL, you may choose to download it now, and we're gonna be using pgadmin 4. So that way you have a visual interface to interact with your database. And it's gonna be the messier part. So let me just quickly get to our roadmap for now. And our roadmap is going to be the following. We're going to set up a basic server with a quick start. Then we're going to set up NodeMon so that anytime you make a change, the server will restart. And the reason why we're going to do that is because feedback is learning. So if we get to a point as fast as we can, to a point where anytime you make a change, you see what happens, then you're going to learn faster because now you have a visual feedback as to what your efforts are getting you to. So that way you can learn about that. Next, we're going to be building basic routes, just simple routes that return some text or HTML or JSON. And the second we get to building JSON routes, we're going to then build a full CRUD route. So a full CRUD API. This CRUD API will use ephemeral data storage, which means that we're just storing the data inside of Node.js. And as such, it's just a proof of concept of a CRUD API. We're going to then extend that CRUD API by actually attaching it to a database. And this is the project that 80% of my mentees, the people I coached, that's the project that they always get tasked with whenever they have to do some sort of job interview. It's a simple CRUD app. As such, if you follow along, you're going to be building the backend for a CRUD app. If you watch my portfolio videos, that's the thing that I teach. Like, this is one of the core building blocks of a good portfolio for a full stack engineer. So you definitely want to code that up. Then we're going to add the database, so that way you have that extra layer. And in order to deal with the database, we're going to be using Next, which is an ORM, or a simple way to basically provide an interface to interact with it. And the next step after that will be to add authentication. We're going to have a way for the user to log in, a way to store our users in a proper way that is secure, and also we're going to have sessions, which means that a user can authenticate in a way that is extremely secure. So if you know me through my JWT video, this is literally the safe way to handle authentication. Any other way, you're very likely to build it in a way that is dangerous or that could be potentially exploited. While this way is going to be extremely safe because it's based on sessions, which is the bread and butter approach to authentication. The last thing we'll do will be to add a templating engine. We're going to use EJS to render HTML pages. We're going to just get started with that, and then I'll show you how complex your life gets when you use those quote-unquote old technologies. So the second we get a little too complex on the EJS stuff, I'm going to stop, I'm going to just drop the topic, and I'm going to show you that you should actually be using React. So I'll leave you at the end of the live stream kind of anticlimactically with a link to a dev.to article that shows you how to set up an Express API with React. So that way you can have best of both worlds, and you can also have session-based authentication, which to me is one of the coolest things you can do. We'll then leave space for Q&A, so any question you put in the chat or any appreciation you offer me, I'll get to. Just for the sake of keeping focused, I'm gonna avoid reading the chat too much because I wanna provide a decent flow for people that are just joining in or just viewing. So at this point, you should know what we're gonna be covering, so let's go ahead and cover that. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're just going to navigate to a new folder. So let's do cd desktop and then entrepreneur. And I'm just going to mkdir. So first of all, I need to make this big because we're live. So I'm going to mkdir to make a folder, and I'll call it Node.js demo. Then I'm going to cd into it. And the first thing we need to do is just initialize npm. And the way you do that is by typing npm, and I'll just remove npm init and -y. And the reason why you put -y is because that way your package.json will automatically be filled in for you. So at this point, we have what is called a npm package. So there's a thing called Node.js, which is the tool that allows you to interact with JavaScript in your terminal. That's what Node is. But then you have npm, and npm is the Node package manager, which is the way in which you can retrieve packages, which are code written by somebody else, and it allows you to manage that, and it allows you to use them. So whenever you use Strapi, you're tapping into the work of hundreds, if not thousands of people, and that's made possible by a tool such as npm. So that's why npm is so important. Now, if we go ahead and we open, as I leak my Stripe key or whatever, don't worry about it, it's fake. So we're gonna open our project by going into entrepreneur Node.js demo, and you'll see that the only file that we have is this package.json. Through this package.json, we're going to be able to install a bunch of dependencies, and we're going to be able to get started. Since we want to do things in a quote-unquote professional way, let's also get started by using Git. As I move my code so that I have a clear indication of where I'm going. So the first thing we'll do is we'll just install Express. And I want to make it clear that the way you learn how to use Express is this. So anybody else that shows you in any different way is just overcomplicating it. You can just go on Google and you type Express Quick Start, and the Express docs, the reason why Express is so adopted is because you click on Getting Started, you look at the hello world, and this is what we're gonna be writing. Like, we could spend hours talking about it or doing some esoteric stuff, but the reality of it is that when you get started with Express, you just go on the hello world, and that's the hello world. And that's why Express documentation is that good. It's that good that you just copy it and it just works. It just works. So at this point, I'm gonna go on Visual Studio Code and I'm gonna create a new file called server.js. Server.js will host the code for our server. So once we have server.js, the next step is literally to go on the express.js and to copy this code. Since I'm on a live stream, since I'm working with a lot of people, I'm not going to copy it. Otherwise, you're going to throw me mean comments. So I'm just going to type it out. And we're going to type const express equals require express, which means retrieve the express package. And the express package is a, let's call it frame, or let's call it package, that allows us to set up a server that listens to a port and that responds to HTTP requests, and it allows us to do it in just those few lines that you're seeing there. The first thing you do is you instantiate an app by typing const app equals express, so by calling it. The next thing you'll do is you'll store your port in a variable, although I'll get to that later, but let's just store it in a variable, and we're gonna type it at 3001 because most people run React in 3000. And then we're just gonna type app.listen. Whoops. We're gonna put the port here, and then we're gonna call a function which is a callback, and this function will be called once the app is listening to our port. So I'm gonna type console.log listening to, and then we can do plus port. So this way, whenever the app is, or the server is actually listening to our port, we're gonna see that. So we can go on package.json, because at this point we have no easy way to run it. And by the way, if you want to learn how to run any script with Node, you could just see that you have server.js here, and you can type node server.js. And we can see that there's an issue because we haven't installed Express, but this is how you will run a script. So let's do things properly. Let's install Express. You can install any package by typing npm space I and then the name of the package. In this case, Express. So that's Express. And once Express is installed, we can type again node space server.js, and you can see that now our application is running. And since we're going to be making hundreds of edits during this live stream, there's no point for us to use this command ever, although I'll show you how to set it up in a way that makes sense. So what we're going to do in order to set that up will be to open up Visual Studio Code, go into scripts, and then type your develop command, which you can call it develop if you're working with Strapi, but most people would just call it dev. I'm going ahead of myself. So let's do the start command first, my bad. The start command, which is the way to run your code, you're gonna type start, and then the start command will correspond to a specific command. And in our case, it will be node, and then the name of the file, which is server.js. So anytime you go in the terminal and you type npm run or npm start, but anytime you type npm run and then the name of the command, which will be, in this case, will be start, you're going to be able to execute that specific command. Due to the abundant usage of the start command, you can just do npm start and it will run in the same way. The reason why you always set up start is because the second you deploy this, for example, to a Roku or to any default CDN, or to any application, they typically will run npm start to actually use it. So that's why you will do that. Next up, let's set up our development environment. But in order to basically receive feedback and to make it so that our application reloads every time we make an edit, we actually need to install a package which is called NodeMon. And NodeMon, it's a super popular package. Let's see how many downloads it has. It probably will have in the millions. Yeah, 2.6 million downloads, one of the most popular packages. And you can install NodeMon as a developer dependency. A developer dependency is something that is used only in the development environment. So I'm gonna go in the terminal and I'm gonna type npm I nodemon and then -- save -dev. And this means that I'm saving it as a development dependency. And you can see that NodeMon, if you open up your package.json, you can see that NodeMon is listed under dev dependencies rather than under dependencies, which at this point we only have Express. Okay, so the reason why you will do that, you'll see it in a second. So let's go ahead and add our second part, our second command, which will be the development command. So I'm gonna type a comma here. I'll type dev, and our dev command will be nodemon on server.js. You can run this command by typing npm run dev, and now you can see that your server is running. But the beautiful thing of this is that if you open up your editor and you make any change, and I mean literally any change, like even pushing a quote here, you'll see that the server will restart. And that means that we got to feedback. At this point, any change you make, you'll immediately see the effect in the server. And that's why it's so important to get your tooling right. In my opinion, this is the minimal setup and there's not much else you're gonna need. You're probably gonna have to install Postman in a second, so I'll mention that. I'm gonna take a quick minute break to see the chat and see if there's anything that I may have missed or any quick question, and then I'm gonna resume with the presentation. No, the live session will be available later, although I highly recommend that you do it live to keep that motivation going. From my experience, the beauty of the live, the beauty of the scarcity of doing something live is the fact that you're forced to do it. Like if you dedicate these 3 hours with me and you just do it, you're golden, man. Like you did it. You don't have to postpone it and do 70 hours of training. You can just do it with me for 2 or 3 hours, and then you can apply it to your specific goals. So that's my recommendation, and I appreciate your viewership. So at this point, we have our basic setup. We have feedback so that anytime we make a change, we're gonna see its impact. And at this point, the next thing we need to install is Postman. So I'm gonna go on Google Chrome and I'll type Postman. And Postman, which you can get at postman.com, and there should be like an orange button at the top right. Postman is a development tool that allows you to communicate with an API. So this is kind of the trifecta of coding for APIs. You're going to have an API inspector, such as Postman, which again, you can download by clicking this button. Then you're going to have the terminal, which is basically a voice so that the server can tell you what's going on. And lastly, you're going to have your code editor so that you can tell the server what to do. So this way, with this trifecta, we can literally build most applications without even looking at the front end. So we're actually going to be spending a lot of time looking at these dark screens. That's why a lot of developers like dark mode, because our setup will be looking a little like this. So I'm going to go on Postman, which I'm pretty sure I forgot to clean up. So don't look at my Postman history. Don't judge me. Don't judge a man by its Postman history. But that said, when you first set up Postman, it will look a little like this. And what you can do with it is you can make requests. So I can go here after clicking this plus sign here, or by pressing Command T, whichever you prefer. I prefer Command T, but I'll click just to give more feedback during the live stream. Then you can set a specific HTTP method, in this case a GET request, and then you can make a request at the port that has been exposed. So I can go on http://localhost:3001, and I will receive an HTML response, and this is the default HTML response that Express will send back that says cannot get. It basically means that Express was not set up to be responsive to the specific route. So anytime you see a message cannot get, cannot post, cannot put, cannot whatever, it means that the Express, first of all, it's an Express app. So now you have a little bit of reverse engineering going on. But at the same time, it means that that specific route was not set up for that specific method. So now you know. Next up, let's set up a quick route. So if we go back by our quick start, the reason why I love the quick start so much, you can see those 3 lines on line 5. You can see app.get, and you can see that it's .get on / and then you'll see a function. This is an arrow function, if you're not familiar with ECMAScript 6. And it's an arrow function that receives 2 parameters. The first parameter being the request, called rec, and the second parameter being the response, called res. And then on line 6, it calls res.send on hello world. So let's try and figure out what we're doing. And instead of me telling you, I want you to take a very simple and experimental approach. So I'm going to copy this, or again, we're on a live stream. I'm going to avoid copying it. I'm going to contain myself, and I'll just type it. app.get / second parameter being a function that receives 2 parameters, rec and res. And we'll get to the rec in the future, but for now we'll just type res.send, and then we're going to send hello world. At this point, we have to test out our code. First of all, does it compile? Let's go in the terminal. We can see that it does compile. Next up, let's open up Postman. And the next thing that I'll do will be to make a get request on localhost 3000. So I'll change this method to get, and I'll make a request. And you can press Command and Enter to make a request at any time. And you can see down here that I've received back a text of hello world. So without me telling you anything else, I would ask you, what happens if I change the text from hello world to just oi, which is the way they say hello in Australia? So what would you expect if you did that? We can try. That's the only answer I want to hear is I'm going to try it. And the answer is you will see the text oi. So now we have an intuition for the fact that whatever we change in here, whatever changes here, apparently changes as the response from the server. So now you know that whatever you put under res.send, for whatever reason, because we're still just learning, but it will be sent back to the server, okay? From the server to the client. So what happens if I put this under a p tag? Again, the only acceptable answer is I'm gonna try. And so we see that we get back a text with a p tag and then the text, whatever changes here. So if we were to use our Google Chrome or our browser to navigate to http://localhost:3001, you will see that this is a paragraph. And if you change the paragraph, the p tag, to an h1 tag, and you refresh, you'll see that the text changes as well. So that means that you can send text, you can send just strings, but you can also send HTML from the server. Obviously, this is going to be a very clunky way to generate HTML, but what I want you to understand at this point is that anytime you want to send back HTML, you just put it in this res.send and you send it back. So let's add the first example, which was just a simple rec and res function that res.sended some text. So this is the first version. And then we're going to have a second version under /second that returns the HTML. So now my question to you is, what happens if I make a GET request at localhost 3001? Since I made a change on my first parameter. The first parameter up here on line 6 is just a slash, while the first parameter up here on line 10 is /second. So let's see what happens, again, by making a request, by just testing. We can see that I get back some text. So I'm clearly getting back whatever is sent back by line 7. However, if I navigate to /second and press enter, you'll actually see the res.send value from the /second method. So basically from the res.send statement on line 11. Now, a question for you is, what happens if you put two methods, or basically two app.gets, in which the first parameter is the slash, or basically the route? Again, the only answer is, I'm going to test it out, and the answer is you always get back the first route that matches. So whenever there's multiple routes that have the same first parameter, the first one that matches will be the one that gets called. Okay, so at this point we have what are called text routes, where you send back a text response, and then you have another type of routes, which is an HTML route, which is returning back HTML. My question to you is, what happens if you send back JSON? So let's give that a check. So I'm going to call this route second, and then I'm going to create a third route down here on line 14, and I'll call it app.get /JSON, which is going to be the name of my firstborn child. With rec and res, and I'm going to res.send, and I'm going to send an object. I'm going to send curly braces, and I'll type status, or I'll actually call it message to avoid any confusion, and I'll type OK. So again, what do you expect? First of all, where is this located, and what are we going to get back? Let's try with the server first. Or with Chrome first. We're going to make a request on /JSON, and let's see what happens. We get back what looks like code. So at this point, the browser may interpret this as text, or it may be interpreting this as JSON. However, if you look at Postman and you make the same request at localhost 3001 /JSON, you'll see that you're getting back a JSON response. So that means that this is already a way for you to send back data from your API to JavaScript, so that then it can then be parsed. So at this point we got from nothing to having an application that can send back stuff, can send back HTML, and it can send back JSON. So the next quick step will be to discuss different routes. And there is no, by the way, Sebastian, you were correct. So the message retracted. I appreciate you answering the question. So at this point, we're going to get started with our first set of CRUD routes. So you saw basically, whenever you look at a method that you're setting up for your Express application, you basically want to look at three components. You want to look at this yellow part here, which is the method, and I'll get to that in a second. But then you want to look at the route, the path, which is the thing we experimented by changing it to /second or /JSON. And then you want to look at the return value. So in this case, we were returning HTML, and in this case, we were returning JSON. So if you were to change app.get to you basically have other methods that you could be using. So I'm going to be showing you that. But before I do that, let's get started by opening up a new chapter, which is the CRUD application. So that's the next challenge that we're going to be working through. So I'm going to put a comment here. This is the CRUD app. And very shortly, I'll show you how to generalize your routes so that basically you can import them and export them instead of having everything in one file. But for now, we're going to bear with that for a few more seconds. So I'm going to check quickly in the chat if there's any quick question to getting stuff, getting HTML, getting JSON, or installing Postman. If there's no question, I'm going to get started with the CRUD application. If any question comes up, I'll be answering them later. At this point, we're going to get started with a CRUD application. CRUD means create, read, update, delete. And it actually is a great little exercise because it maps very well to how an API is built. By going through this section of the video, you're going to not only learn about creating a CRUD app, but you're also going to be learning about API conventions relating to setting up a CRUD app. So if you get tasked with making a video, making a project where you have to build a CRUD app, basically just follow this video and you're going to be golden, really golden. So that's what's coming up next. I'm going to pull up the code so that I avoid saying any dumb stuff. That said, let's get started. So the first thing we'll do is we'll set up a quick way for us to store our data. So let's say that our CRUD app is built on, just a second. Let's say that it's built on creating posts, which will be a great example. Or we can also turn that around, and instead of creating posts or articles, we're just gonna create quick messages. So we're just gonna create a quick log of messages. And just to give it a little bit of flavor, which is something that recruiters very much enjoy, we're gonna call this the gratitude app. So instead of building just a basic CRUD app with a post or a note or stuff like that, or tasks to complete, we're just gonna build a very basic CRUD app that is gonna be a gratitude journal. So every item will contain a message, and your user should be saying stuff that they're grateful for, such as I'm grateful for having the opportunity to teach, I'm grateful to having the time to actually work on something that I enjoy, and I'm grateful for your viewership. So that's the stuff that we're gonna be working on. So let's get started. So the first thing will be to build a simple store. So let's build our const items, which will be the variable that will hold all of our data. And for now, we're just gonna save it as an empty array. Next up, let's build a simple function that will generate the items. So we can call it create items. So const create item. And especially now that we're just learning about Node.js, something that you want to take the habit of is to just use this JS doc convention to write comments on your code. So you saw me do a comment with double slashes, and in this case I typed gratitude or create, read, update. These comments are good. However, there's a pattern, especially when you write functions, that is called JS doc, from a tool called JS doc, which is copied from PHP doc and C doc, etc., that allows you to write comments that will be then automatically converted to documentation. So it's a great habit for you to do that whenever you build a function that may be a little obscure. So in this case, we're going to build a function called create item. This function will receive a parameter called title. And given that, it will automatically return, which means that we're going to use round parentheses. It will automatically return an object. That's why we're going to use curly braces. And this object will have a parameter of title. Basically, it's just going to be an object with the name of its key being called title and the value called title as well. The other thing that we're going to need to do is a way for us to generate an ID. There are a million of patterns. There's even a package called UUID that is very much used. But in this example, I'll just show you a very simple pattern that you can implement at any time. And that will be to have a counter up here. So you can type let counter equals 1 or 0, let's say. And then you can just put a new parameter in your item, call it ID, and then set the ID to be equal to counter plus plus, which means that you're doing what is called a post increment, which means that you're getting the value of counter, you're passing it to the ID, and then you're calling plus plus on it, which means that the second you generate an item, so the first item, your first item will have, let's say, a title of never gonna give you up, and then it's gonna have a counter of 0. The second item will have a text of what's up, and it's gonna have a counter of 1. Let's put that into practice because that's how you actually learn. So let's go on line 23. And by the way, we can still do something like this. We could do console.log items. And if you go on the terminal, you can see the items down here. So you can always just comment console.log stuff so that you can see it. Next up, let's see if my consideration was correct. We can do items.push, and then we can call create item, and we can pass a text of never gonna give you up. So now we can save. And my bad, I need to put this at the top. So the compiler is telling me cannot access create item before initialization. So I'm just gonna put the function up here. Actually, counter is defined here. So we'll define counter first. Then we're going to have our function, and then we're going to manipulate the items. And then we can, again, console.log the items. And you can see that now it contains an object called never going to give you up with an ID of 0. So as expected. So there is zero interactivity to this, right? There is no engagement at this point. We just built a way to store our data. And I'm already making it a little complex, so you may be feeling like, why am I even doing this? The reason why I'm doing the ID is so that then we can manipulate it later when we build our CRUD routes. And the reason why I'm using an object is because typically you're working with JSON, so you're always returning an object. And in this case, you're going to return a list of objects, but I'll get to that in a second. So let's find a way to retrieve these items. So instead of having to look at them from a console.log, let's allow us to retrieve them through an API request. So the first thing we're gonna do, just like we did up here, is an app.get. And since we're working with our specific CRUD, we're gonna put a text of /CRUD, and that's gonna be our first route. It's gonna be just /CRUD. And I'm gonna put the second parameter, which is a function that receives a parameter of request, rec, and a parameter of res, response. And then we're going to simply res.send the items. So we're gonna just send back the items whenever you make a GET request to /CRUD. Let's go on Postman. On /CRUD, let's make a request, and we get back a list of objects, and we only have one object with a title never gonna give you up and an ID of 0. So now we have to figure out how to add new items. And this is when we're gonna introduce a different type of HTTP method, and most of the times through convention, whenever you add a new item, you make what is called a post request. So whenever you're retrieving something, we'll go into what something is later, but whenever you're retrieving, you are getting something. Instead, whenever you are creating something new, you are posting it. That's kind of the idea that we're gonna be following, and I'm gonna get more nuanced as we keep going. For now, let's go on line 38 and type app.post, open parentheses, single quote, /CRUD, and then the second parameter will be again a rec and a res. And we can simply basically write code to add a item. So if you think about it, what does it mean to write an item? There's more than one step. The first step is to retrieve the title, or do we call it title? Yes, retrieve the title, and then create the item, and then you're gonna push the item in the list. And the last thing we'll do, which is by convention, is return the item you created. This is just by convention. You typically show that whatever you did had an impact by sending back the specific item. We also are going to need to figure out and ensure that people send us an item with a title. So if they don't send us a title, we're not going to be able to create an item. As such, we also want to ensure, once we retrieve the item, we also want to ensure that the item or the title exists, right? Or that the request, let's call it like this, request contains a title. Because if it doesn't, we're not going to be able to engage with it. So let's figure out how to retrieve an item. We're going to need to do two things. The first thing, in order to retrieve the title, will be to figure out where the title will be. And I can tell you that it's going to be in the request parameter. However, we're not going to be able to parse it unless you specify that Express is supposed to parse JSON bodies. So the way we can do that is by scrolling up to the top. And if you have a question on this, let me know. But the way you're going to do that is you're going to tell Express to use a middleware, which I'm going to talk about later, but to use something that we call express.json. So this means that app, which is our server, will use express.json, and express.json is a way through which Express will receive your request. It will look for a JSON payload, or a JSON body more specifically, and if there's a JSON body, it's going to populate our request parameter with that JSON body. So I'm going to comment this out to show you what I mean. I'm going to comment it out, and I'll come back in a second. I'm going to scroll down to our post request, and I'm going to type a console.log. And whenever I do a console.log, I always like to put the name of the variable on the left and then the value on the right, so you can always know what's going on. So I'm going to go on this side. Actually, this side is good. I'm going to type rec.body, and then I'll type a comma and a space and rec.body. Okay. Then I'm going to put the terminal, and I'm going to put the terminal here on the left, and I'll put it down here. And then I'll make a post request to /CRUD. And I'm going to actually have no body. And you're going to see undefined. However, if I put a row body of type JSON, this is something that a lot of my students don't notice. I clicked on row, and then I click on this drop down and set it from text to JSON. It's very important. And then I put curly braces, and then I add my title, and I call my title, this is my swamp. And then I make my request. I still get undefined. And that's because we're not using our middleware that parses JSON bodies. So whenever you don't know what's going on with your rec.body, it's because you forgot to use a middleware that parses JSON. A lot of people use body parser, which is amazing. I typically use body parser. However, for specific use cases that we're going to be using, which are just JSON requests, Express has one out of the box. So I'm just going to uncomment this, and our server is going to restart because we're using Node.js. Then I'm going to make a post request here on the right, post on /CRUD with a row JSON body. So it's JSON here. I put curly braces and a parameter called title, and then a value of this is my swamp. I'm going to press enter or command enter, and you can see that the rec.body is now an object with a key of title and a value of this is my swamp. The next thing we're going to do now that we have a rec.body is to destructure it so that we can get the title. So we can type const curly braces title equals rec.body. This will not crash because even if you pass no body, so let's say we do none here, your rec.body at this point will always be an object. So it's never going to crash. So you don't need a try catch. And if I forget a try catch, build in it on me. I'm doing a 3-hour live stream. So be lenient of me. So next up, we got our title. If you want, you can console log it. However, I trust that we're going to be able to retrieve it. So the next thing that we need to do is to ensure that the request contains a title. And a typical pattern you'll see for simple validation, this is as far as I'll go for validation, although we're going to write a lot of these checks. A simple pattern is to see if there's no title or if validation fails. So instead of assuming the validation, so there's two ways you can always write validation. One way is the way you assume everything works, and if something is wrong, you're going to throw. And the other one is you assume it will always fail, but then everything has to pass. So those are your two approaches, the optimistic versus the pessimistic approach. In our case, we're going to check if not title, which means that the title is either an empty string, it's null, or it's undefined. If any of these, then, as somebody probably subscribed, that was scary actually. Let's see what happened. Okay, thank you for following. Thank you for following. So that was odd. But basically we have the if not title. So if there's no title, then we're gonna need to throw. We're gonna need to raise an exception. But since we're working with a JSON API, we don't send exceptions. We actually change the status of our response. In this case, we're gonna change it to 400, and then we're gonna send an error message. And I'm looking at it to find the exact way. Okay, so the way we're gonna send the error message will be by doing res.send, or actually res.status, which is a way for us to set the status of our response, in this case to a 400, which is a typical generic error typically related to the payload. So if you want a quick refresher on status codes, 200s are the ones when stuff went correctly, 300s have to do with redirects or authorization, 400s have to do with errors, and 500s have to do with stuff that exploded. So whenever you see a 500, it means that the server exploded. If you see a 400, it means that you did something wrong. So in this case, if you don't send the title, we're gonna res.status 400, and then we're gonna send a message, or we can call it error, and the error message that we're gonna send will be please add a title. Let me see if I can chunk it up like this. There we go. So if there's no title, we're gonna send that message. So next up, I'm gonna make my post request with no body, and let's see what we get back. We see that we get back the error message, please add a title. Okay, so up until this point, we basically covered the wrong operation. Let's actually cover the proper one where there is a title. So I'm gonna set it up so that my body is row and JSON, and I have a object with a property called title and a text of this is my swamp. So now if the title is there, we're gonna create an item. So let's say const item equals to, let's call the method create item, and we're gonna pass the title to it, and then we're gonna push this to our items. So we can do items.push item, and the last thing we're gonna do is we're gonna res.send the new item. And the reason why you return the new item that you just created is so that your API user knows how the object will look like. So let's try making this post request on /CRUD, which is up here, with a title and the text, this is my swamp. Let's make the request, and we can see that we get back this object with a title of this is my swamp and an ID of 1. If you were to press again command and enter, you will simply be creating more than one item. And if you want to test and see how many items you have, you can just change the request from a post request to a get request, and you can retrieve all of the items that you created. Now, since this is ephemeral, anytime you reset the server, you're going to lose all of your data. At this point, I'm going to take a 1-minute break. I'll see if there's any question. Adding people, maybe you can use. Hey, Maddie, good to see you. Glad you made it. You should definitely follow this because this is basically the CRUD up. So Maddie has been following this channel for a while, and I gave you a few advice on building your portfolio. There was a video on the portfolio. There's a new video tomorrow on the user profile on Upwork. So what we're building right now is a portfolio piece that you can put in your portfolio. So you should definitely be coding along, and I want you to follow very closely. If there's any quick question related to the post request, I'm gonna answer that. Otherwise, hey Bruce T, hi from Italy, good to see you. And if you have any question on this, I'll answer it immediately. Otherwise, I'll get to the rest of the CRUD, which we have a few more endpoints to cover. Let's see if any question comes up. In the meantime, something that I forgot is the JS doc pattern. So whenever you want to make a comment to a function, you just type /**, and if your IDE is cool, such as Visual Studio, you then press enter, and now you have a JS doc, which is a way for you to specify the how a function works. So you can put this the type, which will be a string, and then you can say, given a title, create an object with sequential ID. The ID being unique is very important because we're going to be using that later. Monk package. I'll get to that later. I'm not sure what the monk package is, to be honest. So at this point, we built our GET request and our POST request. The next 3 routes that we're going to be building have to do with one item. So whenever you're building your basic API, you want to find a way to get all of the items, and then you want to find a way to create a new one. So these are the 2 ones that we covered. The next thing will be to figure out a way to retrieve only one item. The first thing we'll do, since we're getting stuff, would be to set it up by using a app.get. And then we're going to have our first parameter, which will be the route, and our path will be /CRUD, because we're following this convention. And then we're going to do /:ID. ID is a wildcard parameter or a dynamic parameter that will change based on the request. The second parameter, it's always going to be a function with rec and res. And the first thing we're going to need to do will be to find this ID value. And the way you can get that is by looking at what are called request.parameters, because these are parameters. And so you can get them by looking at rec.params. So you can type const curly braces ID equals rec.params. This is equivalent to writing const ID equals rec.params.id. And again, rec.params will always be an empty object, worst case, so it's never gonna throw. And the next thing we're gonna do is, given the ID, we need to find the item. And that's why we used the ID. So const index. In this case, we can actually just get the item. So we're gonna call it const found. So the item that we found is gonna be equal to items.find, which is a array method that allows us to specify a function that allows us to compare the items, and if we find a match, it's going to return the item. So we can write element, and then we're just going to compare the element.id, which is the current element, and we're going to compare it to the ID. So if they match, if they're the same, then we're good to go. Since we're using numbers, looks like it's gonna work. So we're gonna use triple comparison, even though technically speaking this should be a string, but I guess we'll see. This is how I wrote it in my code, so I'm assuming it's gonna work. And if we found our item, then we're gonna res.send it. Otherwise, if we didn't find it, we're gonna res.status, which is a way to set a different status code for a response, to 404, which is not found, and then we're gonna send our message, which will be no item with such ID. There we go. So at this point, let's look at the terminal. It compiles and it's proper. Let's try and retrieve one of these. So I'm seeing ID of 0, ID of 1, ID of 2. So let's go on /CRUD/1, and we see no item with such ID. And I think it's because I've changed it to a triple comparison. So if we change it to a double comparison, I know I'm actually making a mistake now, okay. Because I'm looking for the ID of 1, but every time we reset the server, we only have one item. So the only one that I could find would be the one on /0. And I'm still getting that because I'm using the triple equal. That's why I was confused. But if I use a double equal, I'll be able to retrieve the item. And that's because the alternative, if you want to use the triple equal, will be to element.id will be a number, while ID is not. So you will do number here. You will typecast it to a number. And by typecasting it to a number, you can use the triple equal. And at that point, you will be good to go. So whichever one works for you, whether you want to use the double equal or the triple equal with typecasting, they're going to work. They're both going to work fine. At the end of the day, we retrieved our query parameter called ID. We use it to find the item. If we find the item, we send it back. If we don't find the item, we send a 404. So the next two routes are very interesting because we're basically going to be applying the same principles, but we're going to be extending. We're going to be taking from other stuff. So I'm going to quickly check if there's any quick question. Time layer that provides CPS substantial usability. Okay, in this video, we're actually going to be covering... Yes, the comparison with triple equals is the comparison for both type and value, which means that instead of just comparing IDs or numbers with strings, you're actually gonna get the comparison of the type of as well. You could technically write the triple equal comparison as if, so let's say type of one double equals to type of 1, and it will be false. So that will be the reason why that failed. Yeah, and the equal sign is the assignment. Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess I'm not as beginner friendly with this introduction. Hopefully, if there's a lot of students that are struggling with more basic JavaScript stuff, you can send me questions, or maybe I can even do a separate video on it. My experience is that if you're content with taking a little bit of a jump in terms of not knowing, so even now I didn't even get into why we have app.get and this kind of stuff, or even what is a middleware, why are they called rec and res and stuff like that. But if you're willing to take kind of a trade-off, then you're basically going to be way more effective. So sometimes it's worth to just get very pragmatical with it, although some people will argue the opposite, and it's a fair position to assume. So the next route that we're gonna work on is the delete route. The delete route will also use the query parameter, but it's going to change the items. So let's go on line 78 and type app.delete. Delete is believe it or not, an HTTP method. By the way, these are all of the HTTP methods, but the only ones that you're ever gonna use, from my experience, are up until here. I've seen some people use head and options, very rarely, but basically these are the methods you're going to be working with, and these are the methods that I'm going to be showing you as well. So we are writing an app.delete on /CRUD/:ID, and again we have our rec and our res, which is request and response, and from our request we're going to get the same ID, so just like that, const curly braces ID equal rec.params. And then we are going to, instead of getting the item, because we don't really care about the item, we're going to get the index, so that then if we find the item, we're going to delete it from our items. So let's type const index equals to items.findIndex. And then we're going to have a function that is going to get the element, and given the element, is going to compare again. So just like we did up here, we're going to do the same. Element.id double equals to ID. And again, if you have a triple equal, you can do a typecast, which technically you can do even here, which will make sense. It will make sense to write something like this. although I guess it really depends on your coding style. And if we find it, so since we're looking for the index, whenever you don't find something, by convention in programming, the index that you're gonna get back is -1 because it's an impossible index, except if you're working with Python. But in JavaScript, -1 is the impossible index, and that's why by convention you get that back. So if we get index greater than -1, then it means that we found it, because it can be 0, 1, etc., etc. So we're gonna do a bunch of stuff. However, if we don't find it, we're gonna do something very similar to this. We're just gonna do a res.status on 404, and we're gonna .send no item with such ID. So at this point, we can test the failure case, and then we're gonna write the success case. So in the case in which we don't find an item, because we go, for example, on ID 3000 whatever, we're gonna get back a message that says no item with such ID. However, if we find it by going to version 0, to ID 0, we're basically not gonna get anything, because at this point we're not res.sending. So our request will be waiting for some feedback, basically. So let's write out the rest of our CRUD route. We're gonna get a copy of the item, and the reason why we get a copy is because even in the delete request, you wanna send back the item that was deleted, and that's why we're gonna make a copy. So const copy, which you can do in many ways, but a very simple ways will be to spread the item's square bracket index into a new object. This is the equivalent to writing object.assign. Basically, you can look at this as copy of items square bracket index, but since we don't have a copy function, this is how we write it. And once we have it, then we're gonna execute our deletion. We're gonna execute the deletion, and the way you execute the deletion is by items.splicing it with the index and a delete count of 1. Splicing is a way to alter an array in place, which means that the specific array that you're splicing will be edited, so we don't need to alter a copy, and we're basically removing the element at the index that we found, and then we're just gonna res.send the copy. So that way the items have been changed, and then we send back the items that was copied for the sake of keeping our conventions going. So at this point, I'm gonna make a GET request first to see what we have, and we still have the element 0. Then I'm gonna change the GET to a delete, and I'll change the path to /0, so /CRUD/0. And at this point, we get back this item, which means that it was deleted. So if I make a GET request to all of the items, I get nothing back. So this is this covers the basic, or the two more straightforward CRUD routes. They both have /ID. We're left with only one. In the meantime, I'm gonna check for any quick question. Looks like there are no quick questions. And the next thing that I'll do is work on the modify route. We basically just need to have a route that allows us to modify our items. And anytime we make a change, by the way, even this space right here, our server will restart, which means that we get back that one item. So that's very convenient whenever you're working and coding. And the biggest thing that I would advise as a general principle, and I hope I'm not gonna have to close the window because it's really hot in here, but the general principle that I will give whenever you're learning or whenever you're coding in general is always deal with one problem at a time. So always chunk up your problems, just like we did up here, where you just retrieve the title, ensure it contains, create it, push it, return it, and always work on one step at a time, as to avoid creating too much complexity, because this stuff is very simple when you do one thing at a time, but it gets very complicated very fast if you start skipping too many steps. So the last route we're working on will be the put route. So I'll type app.put on /CRUD/:ID. We're gonna have our function with rec and res. At this point, we wrote a lot of these functions, and you're gonna keep writing them for the rest of the afternoon. And the first thing we're gonna need will be the request parameters. So const curly braces ID equals rec.params. And then the second thing that we're gonna get with a put request will be a different title. Because if you want to alter an object such as this one, you basically have to alter the title. So we're gonna get the text from the rect.params, just like we did up here. We did it in the post request on line 50. That's exactly what we're gonna do here on line 93. Const curly braces text. No, it's gonna be title equals to rec.body. And then we're gonna send the same error message. So if there's no text, or sorry, if there's no title, because my example app uses text, we're gonna res.status 400.send, and we're gonna send please add a title. So this is our simple validation. The next thing we'll do will be to find the index, just like we did here on line 81. Const index equals items.findIndex element, and we're just gonna compare the element.id with the ID that we got, just like we did above. And you could argue that we're rewriting a bunch of codes, and I would agree with you actually, where you could write a function that given an index retrieves it. Although to be fair, we're doing such a simple example that even trying to optimize it makes it almost more complex. So you want to keep that in mind. That's something that I see a lot, and honestly I don't have a simple answer for it. So if you feel like you're writing too much code, you can always change it. That's cool. Or not. Technically you could just turn these two lines into one function, because given the request you can return the items that were found. So that would be a way to simplify or to shorten the code. But in order to keep it as simple as I can, I'm just gonna be a little more write a little extra code. And so if we find the element by having an index that is greater than -1, then we're gonna do a bunch of stuff. Otherwise, we're gonna again res.status 404, because we didn't find it, and .send it with no item with such ID. At this point, let's look at what happens if we do find it. The first thing will be to create a new item. So const new item equals to create item with a title, and then we're going to splice, but this time instead of just splicing like we did here, we actually have a third parameter in the splice, which is called the insert, where you can insert stuff in that position. So we're gonna go on line 103, and we're gonna type items.splice, and we're gonna type index, comma 1, which means that at the index that we found it, we're gonna delete one element, and we're gonna replace it with the new item. And lastly, we're going to res.send. We can send the new item, and technically speaking, we can just send items square bracket index, or you could also just send new item. Let's see if that works. I'm gonna do a get request to get all of them, and we can see that we have an object with an ID of 0 and a title of never gonna give you up. I'm gonna set this to a 0 so that I can retrieve it. I'm gonna change the method to a put method, and then I'm gonna change the text to we are no strangers to love. And there we go. So at that point you have updated the object. We can do a get request on /0 to see the updated object. Very interesting. Okay. So due to how I wrote this code, we actually will still change the ID. So that's actually interesting. I didn't think about it when I was writing my code, because technically speaking, we just removed the item and we created a new one. And that's actually, I guess that wouldn't satisfy our the way an update route would work. So we actually can, I'm just gonna come up with the solution on the spot. We can do either two things. We can rewrite this part right here, or we can change the create item to make it so that if you specify an ID, it will preserve the ID. I think we can do this. So we can just add this ID parameter here. I think it's more interesting to do it this way. And then we can go on the create item. And create item will have an ID, which is a optional parameter. And then if we have ID, then we're gonna have the ID. Otherwise, we're just gonna do an increment of the counter. So at that point, the server is restarted, so the index is still 0. I'm gonna do a put request on /crud/0. We updated it, and this time the ID is consistent with the initial one. Clearly, you can also change the way in which you added the array. I thought writing a method with a conditional parameter to be a little more interesting, and that's why I did that. Otherwise, you can just do items. You would just also do items square bracket index dot title equals to title, and that will be the way. But for some reason, I feel like this will ruin what I was trying to do with having a function that generates a new item. So I think I'm gonna take a quick break, probably a 5-minute break, and when I come back, I'm gonna be talking about databasing. So we're gonna do this exact same set of routes, but we're gonna do them with the database. And actually, before I do that, I'm gonna show you a pattern that allows you to take all of these routes that all have a prefix of /crud, put them on a separate file, and then use it in a way that is more convenient. So I'll show you how to structure your routes in a more convenient way, and then I'll show you databases. Since I'm taking a few minutes break, if you have any question, use the chat to ask them. And additionally, make sure to download pgadmin. You can download pgadmin by going on Google, typing PostgreSQL, and just go on postgresql.org, click on download, and download your binaries. It's going to download a bunch of stuff. You need to have pgadmin in order to continue. Once I come back, we're going to literally code the CRUD application for a more interesting use case for products in this case, although it's going to be a very simple application, and we're going to do it with an actual database so that you have an application that is no longer ephemeral. It actually has its data in the database. So make sure to download PG. I'll go in a quick break, and I'll talk to you in a few minutes. So I'm going to click on be right back and mute. And there we go. We're back. Let me just make sure. Yeah. Okay. So at this point, we're back. We wrote our simple CRUD application. This is one of the most common interview questions that you're gonna get. I'm not gonna be developing the front end during this live, otherwise it would last probably 7 hours. What we're gonna do is we're gonna get up to the point where we render a few things on screen through a templating engine, and then I'm gonna basically have you feel the pain of using that stuff so that you have motivation to learn React or Vue, whichever you prefer. I'm pro SPAs in general. I'm not telling you how to live your life. You can do whatever you want. Before I get to using databases, which again, we're going to use PostgreSQL. So if you don't have PostgreSQL, go on postgresql.org, download your binaries, and you need to have pgadmin. Otherwise, we're going to have a very hard time talking to each other and understanding. So make sure that you have that. And as soon as you do, we're going to be able to continue working together. So the next pattern, which is again a great reason why Express is so awesome, is the generalization of your routes, or let's call it the putting your routes in a subfolder, which is the /routes folder. So if you go in guides and you click on routing, the first thing you'll see if you scroll to the bottom, I think it's the birds example. Yeah, it's the birds example. And this is how you write routes that use the same router. They use what is called express.router, and they basically allow you to write routes in separate files. This is one of the most important lessons that you can learn when working with Express, and it basically allows you to have a cleaner code and a cleaner setup for your folder. So at the end of the day, we're gonna have a couple of keywords. One keyword is router, and router is just a way to use app without calling a new app, because otherwise you would have a separate instance of your server. That's what router is, and that's why you can export it. And the second thing is app.use. We're gonna get into app.use a little bit later when we talk about authentication. However, app.use is a way in which you can use what is called a middleware. And a middleware is basically, you can think of it as a bunch of functions or as a single function that is called, it does its thing, and then it resumes execution. So if you were to write the simplest middleware, I'm just gonna get into this for 2 seconds. I'll show you a demo middleware. You will simply type app.use, and then you will set up a route. So in this case, let's just do star, which means any route at any time. And then you would have a function, and this function will actually have 3 parameters. The first one will be rec, the second one will be res, and the third one will be next. And what you can do is you can do something here. So I'll just do console.log. This middleware does nothing, but you can imagine it doing an API request, changing something, changing a variable, triggering some other function, doing a bunch of math or whatever. And then you can just call next. And when you call next, it means that you're done and you resume the execution. So anytime we make any call at this point, if we go in Postman, we're gonna see the middleware doing nothing and then letting the application run as if nothing happened, basically normally. And that's a very useful thing to keep in mind. So that's why I just primed you for it. And priming means the idea that I expose you to a concept and I don't go too deep. I just show it to you and then I skip over it, and that's gonna help you learn faster later. So that's why I just primed you on the middleware, because we're gonna use that when we get to authentication. So at this point, let's chunk up our routes. The first thing we'll do is open up the folder explorer. Let's create a new folder called routes. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a new file called index.js, and I'll also create a new file called basic.js. We're gonna have our basic routes. Actually, we call them CRUD, so we may as well rename that to CRUD.js. And in CRUD.js, we're just gonna go on server.js, and everything that we have in the CRUD section, so we have our CRUD app here on line 29, and I think it ends at line 120, yeah, around 120 or 117. We're gonna cut it out with Command X, and then we're gonna go in the CRUD, and we're just gonna paste it, which means that our server currently no longer supports those CRUD routes. At this point, let's go in CRUD.js and let's follow the pattern that we just looked at. So the pattern from Express routing is import Express, get a router through express.router, and then module.exports the router, and then rename every app to router. That's the pattern. So let's do that. I'm gonna go in Visual Studio Code, go to the top and type const express equals require of express. Then we're gonna get our router. Router equals express.router, which is a function. And next up, we're just going to module.exports our router. Since we're gonna export it, we may as well export it in a place where we see it. Although I'm ambivalent on this, on whether you should put the module.export at the top or at the bottom. I'm very ambivalent on this one. I'd love to hear your thoughts, actually. So whatever you think is correct is probably the right approach. And at this point, let's change the app here on line 26 to router.get, line 30 app.post to router.get, or router.post, line 54 app.get to router.get, and then line 64, again, just type router, and then just type router again. We could also do a find and replace, which is the smart approach, but I'll go a little slower for the sake of the live stream. And you can see that we have all of these /CRUD. We're actually not gonna need them anymore. Let's just rewrite them to just / because you'll see that in a second. So the routes with /CRUD/ID, just rewrite them as /:ID, and that's it, because you'll see that in a second as we're gonna basically prefix all of these routes in the index.js file. So at this point, we have the CRUD.js file, and then we have our index.js file, which currently does nothing. So the first thing we want to do on the index.js will be to get express. Then once we get express, we want to get our router with const router equals express.router. And then we need to get our routes, so we can call const CRUD equals require of ./CRUD. And then we can type router.use, and for the specific route that is the CRUD route, we're gonna use CRUD. And this is as simple as it goes for you to set up routes that are used the routes that come from a different file, so that you can have simplified files. And then you can just module.exports your router. Let's actually module.exports here to follow the convention of having exports at the top. So at this point, we have our CRUD route here, and we have the CRUD application here. Let's see what happens to the terminal. Nothing. And we also are not using them. So in order to actually use them, we're going to have to type app.get on / and actually we're going to type app.use on / and we're going to have the routes down there. So we can technically just type in a require statement down there. That's something that you see, especially in the early days. Some people will type just require of routes. Of point, we have our middleware that will work anyway. We can type end demo middleware here, and then we have our routes down here. So let's try and see if they would work. I'm seeing a typo on router on CRUD.js line 2. Router is supposed to be uppercase R. There we go. Let's check it out again. Looks fine. Let's see if it's working. I'm gonna make my GET request. It looks like it works, and it works with that. And let's try posting a new one, and we can see that it's working properly. And basically now, even though you're still using the /CRUD in Postman, your code is no longer showing that, because if you go and you look at your CRUD routes, you'll see that they're just doing /. And that's because in the index.js file, we added a prefix. And this is a very common pattern you'll see. I'm going to check if there's any quick question related to this. You can use pgadmin docker. Yeah, I could use Docker. However, I actually don't feel comfortable teaching that right now, so I'm not gonna do that. So at this point, we have chunked up our routes. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to work with a database. So there's going to be multiple sides to this. One side is just setting up the database. The other one is setting up the routes. Since we're doing routes right now, let's just quickly set that up. We're gonna stay on this index file, and we can create a new file on the routes folder called, in this case, let's just call it products, because we're going to work with a table called products. So let's call the route products.js. And what we're going to do with that is we're still going to import Express. So const express equals require of Express. We're going to get a router again. And then let's just set up one route with router.get / a request and a response. And let's just res.send an empty list, because at this point we haven't really worked on that side. And then let's module.exports router. So the next thing we want to do here on line 9 is router.use / products, comma space, products. And we're going to import products up here on line 5 with const products equals require of / products. There we go. Let's look at the compilation. It works. So at this point, the next step is to actually set up the database. So if you don't have PostgreSQL, you're going to need to Google PostgreSQL, and go on postgresql.org and click on download. And then you can follow the instructions on screen. And at the end of the setup, you're going to be asked with a couple of questions that have to do with the passwords that you're going to be using. Make sure that you remember those passwords. I'll have to check my own passwords and find them and make sure that I have access to them as well. But it's good. It's very important that you don't forget them, because otherwise you're going to have to go through a bunch of a bunch of researches and stuff in order to reset the passwords, etc., etc. So it's going to be very annoying. And once you're done with the installation, you should be able to launch a pgadmin window by just clicking on the elephant icon, and you should see something like this. You should see PostgreSQL and then databases. So I'm gonna spend a minute and wait to see if anyone else needs to set up their PG installation. And this is probably the hardest part we'll have to do with dealing with the database. Well, the main thing I would advise, Ritz, is that you look for projects that you want to go for. So what I'm showing you here is what you can do with Express, basically building APIs, which I think is the most common use case. And then you just want to see for stuff that you want to build. Whatever you want to build, you just want to give that a shot. So what do you want to build? Do you want to build a website? Do you want to build a social network? Do you want to build an app? Do you want to build an API? Do you want to build a UI for whatever? Do you want to work with Ethereum? Whatever you want to work with and whatever you want to build, you start building it slowly but surely. So take a look at this video, especially with the start. It's going to show you all of the API stuff. Then take that knowledge and build something that you care about. That's the most important thing. The most important thing is that you build something that you're passionate, because that way you're going to keep learning. So at this point, we have our databases. And we can create a new database by right-clicking in here and clicking on create and click on database. And you can just put a database name. You want to build a website. You want to build a website, learn React, something that I'll cover later, but basically learn React and then follow this guide. Follow this guide for the Node.js stuff and then learn React or Vue. I would recommend React, but you can learn Vue. Learn those. And that way you can build your websites, and then you can fetch data through what I'm teaching right now. So thank you for your viewership. Follow along. If you follow along this video, you're going to be golden. And then just learn React, which I have a 2-hour intro, or you can take my complete Strapi course to build that plus some Gatsby projects as well. So that's a great path for you to get started with. So let's create a database. We're going to call it just a demo. I'm just going to call it demo. And that's going to be my database. And if you open schemas, you should be able to see your tables. I was super confused at the beginning of when I started looking at this. I thought it was overly complicated, but you can go on the tables and you can create a new table by just right clicking on tables. So I opened my database demo, I click on schemas, I click on tables, and I right click on it and I click on create table. And now you can create your table. For our use case, we're building a product. So our product, and I'm looking it up, should have just a couple of keys. Let me make sure that I type it out correctly, because I don't think we're going to be building something too complicated. So I think we're just going to build a product with a name and a price. Yeah, that's what we're going to be building. So we're going to have an ID, a name, and a price. So the first thing will be the name of the table, which will be products, the plural products. Then we're going to go in the columns. And this is where there's a couple of gotcha if you ever work with MySQL or PHP where pgadmin is a little different. You're going to go up here and click on plus, and we're going to add our ID, which is our primary key. Primary key means that whenever we refer to this table from another table, we're just going to use the name of the table, but we're actually referring to the ID column. So for data type, we need to get a auto-incrementing data type, which is called serial. So whenever you forget PG, it's basically you need a serial. You need the foundation of a healthy breakfast, and you're gonna use the serial. So you're gonna use your big serial, and the next thing will be to just put a name. So we can click on plus. We put a name here, and you can use a lot of stuff. You could type varchar. From my research, a varchar, your best option is to always use text. That's my understanding of it. I may be wrong. Don't quote me on this one. But you can basically the text will be the unlimited text. So you can put as much text as you want, versus a varchar, a charvar, or a char square bracket will be a limited amount. So just to avoid any confusion, we're just going to use as many as we need. And lastly, we're going to have a price. And since we're working with APIs, and I think I'm also going to mention Stripe really rapidly, we just can just use the integer. So we can just do a integer. Let's just do a big int. So that way we have an integer value for our price. And that means that our price is going to be expressed in cents. And that's a very common pattern, especially when you're working with Stripe. So at this point we saved. Again, if you want to look at the columns, you should have an ID, you should have a name, and you should have a price. Let me see if there's any quick question I may have aroused from this. Looks like not. Okay, so at this point we have our table. And the next part will be to set up nex. And nex is typed as KNEX and then JS. And it's an ORM. It's basically an abstraction layer that allows us to deal with any database of the SQL family without having to deal with their specific syntax. So we can learn one syntax to rule them all. That's the point of using an ORM. And in this case, we're going to be using nex. We're also going to do something that is called secure credential storing. So if you were to commit any of these files, we're going to use a pattern that allows you to avoid having to do that. I'm going to show that to you in a second. So the first thing we'll do is just install nex. So let's go in the terminal. And we're in a root folder. And we're going to type npm I KNEX, nex. And once we have nex, we basically will have to set up our database. I'd rather show you the proper way first, because it just makes sense to show you the proper way to set up the database instead of showing you a fast way. So let's just go with the straight up proper way first. And the proper way is to use a tool called .env. So we're gonna look at .env for a second. You can type .env or .env npm, and you can find that this is a package, and this package will basically load a file called .env, and it will inject that data into your Node.js runtime. The reason why you do that is so that you can have a file, which typically called .env, an environment file, And having this file allows you to store credentials such as the database, username, password, etc., without committing them to source control. So I guess I'm gonna open a very brief introduction to source control. You basically open a new tab and you go and you search for git download, and that's how you get source control. You get git, which is the most popular source control tool. And there's basically 3 commands that you have to understand before you can ever use git. The first command, actually the command that you're going to be using a lot, but I'm kind of improvising a new intro to git. But basically the way you get started by using git will be to type git init. And that initializes an empty git repository in your folder. And then the next thing you have to do is create a file called .gitignore. So I'm going to go on Visual Studio Code, and you can see that all this stuff is green, and that's because it's been tracked by Git. And in order to avoid tracking stuff that we don't want to share, we're going to create a new file called .gitignore. And this is the first thing you have to do whenever you work with Git. And in the .gitignore, we want to ignore a couple of files. The first file will be called .env. And the second one is going to be a folder, and it's the node_modules folder. So if you ever shared your code with somebody else, you may have noticed that if you share an application, you're probably sharing 100 megabyte, 300 megabyte, even a gigabyte for an application where you may have written 4 or 5 files. And that happens because you are passing the node modules. So whenever you want to save space on your server, on your device, or you want to just like keep the portability and save a little bit of space, you can just delete the node modules folder, and then you can reinstall the node modules whenever you need them. That's because node modules, you are literally meant to install them on your own machine when you need them, instead of passing them around. And that's why we remove them from source control. The other one is the .env file, which will contain a bunch of our secrets, so we don't want to share those secrets anywhere. At this point, we have a decent setup. I'm going to go in a quick break to see if I can find the database password and stuff, and I'll be back literally in a minute once I found those, so that we can get started. In the meantime, you want to look up at those, and I'll be back literally in a minute. Okay, so I'm live. I'm actually not sure if I did the transition properly. Yeah, I think I did. Cool. So that's cool. I managed to pull it off. So at this point, we're you can see my credentials. That's fine. They're all local credentials, so there's no risk in showing them. But basically, this is an example of a .env file. You can see a stripe key. You can see a DB host, you can see a user, you can see a password, you can see a name. You can understand why I don't want you to know that my password for my database is 123456. So you can understand why you would not commit such a file on source control. I think there was a research done, or like an experiment done by a YouTuber, where he started searching for Bitcoin private keys in GitHub. And I think they were able to raise a bunch of stuff. So you want to be aware of the things you commit when you start using source control, and starting with a solid gitignore is probably the most important thing you can do for that. So that's my quick introduction to Git. Other quick introduction will be how you actually work with it. You type git status to figure out what's going on. You're going to type this stuff so much. It's just that initially you think there's like a learning curve, but after a day working with Git, you're going to figure this out. You type git status to see what's going on. You type git add dot to add all the files, or you type a specific file if you want to only track one, and then you git commit -m, and then you put a message. If you don't git commit -m, you're gonna have to use vi, which means that you have to learn more stuff. So I would recommend just using -m and then put a message, and the message in this case will be initial commit with routes folder. Boom. So now it's committed, and if I do git status again, I'm seeing that the working tree is clean, which means there are no changes that haven't been saved. There are more than this stuff to learn. There's way more. Git is such a complicated and deep tool. Not only complicated, but it's also deep. Like, it's very useful in that sense. However, those 3 commands are all you need to know in order to get started and to be able to work with most likely 2 or 3 people. So if you work in a small team or as a solopreneur, you're most likely going to be fine with only these commands, as long as you don't accidentally commit your node modules or your .env file. So at this point, I'm going to copy this file over to my other project, and I'll comment it so that I give you a little bit of time if you're typing it out as well. But at the end of the day, this .env file basically will contain a bunch of credentials, and we need to find a way to inject them at runtime. So at this point, I have my DB host, which is localhost if you're working with localhost. Then the user is Postgres, the password is 1234556. The database name for this specific database will be demo. So I'm gonna change that to demo. So that's my thingy. And as for showing PKs on Stripe, by the way, there's a way to invalidate any key. I'm not even sure if this one is active, but so I'm not really concerned with leaking my key on that end. Although I would highly recommend avoiding live streaming your private keys at any time. It's definitely not a good idea. So at this point, we have this .env file in the root folder, and we contain a key DB host, a key DB user, a key DB password, and a key DB name. These are the keys that we care. The Strapi key you can ignore. These are the keys that we're looking for now. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use Next to connect to our database. So I'm going to create a new folder called DB, and I'll create a new file called index.js because our project is not that complex, so we have no reason to overcomplicate with multiple folders and multiple files. Let's just have a very simple pragmatic approach. Then we may or may have not installed .env, actually don't remember. So I'm going to npm i.env to install .env, which is a package that will take the .env file and will automatically inject those credentials for me. And I'll show you how to use it in a second. Then I'm gonna go in Visual Studio Code in the index.js file, and I'm gonna require .env.config. This basically means that .env will load this .env file and it will inject these variables, and I'm going to be able to access them as process.env dot the name of the variable. So in this case, .db_host. And again, the reason why you do this is so that somebody else that doesn't have your .env file cannot find your credentials. So you can see my credentials because I'm showing them on a live stream, but if you were to go on the GitHub repo that I wrote, you should not be able to access those credentials because the git ignore is not putting the .env, and then if you go on DB, I used those environment variables to preserve myself. So at this point, what I want you to think in your head in terms of a security checklist is, how are you handling with your credentials whenever you're publishing stuff? And this is a very simple setup that should ensure that you're safe with your credentials. So at this point, let's set up the database. We're gonna call it Next. And Next, you basically will, if you wanna go deeper with Next, you probably will have to look at the documentation. The biggest advice I have is just to practice with it because the documentation is not bad, but in my opinion, it's easier if you use it rather than try and learn and read it out. So the examples are almost easier than the docs from my experience. So that's how I taught it to myself. But you may have a different outlook on it. So at this point, we're just setting it up, and the setup for PG is that you need to have PG installed. So that's another thing we need to install actually. And so I'm gonna go in the terminal, and in order to install PG, you can type npm i.pg. So at this point, in this section, I had you install PG, which is Postgres, then I had you install Next, and then I had you install .env. So this is how your package.json should look. And we're gonna go ahead on line 3 and keep going. We're gonna require Next, and this is because they write it this way, so we wanna look cool too. And we're gonna provide it, Next basically returns a function, and we're gonna provide this function with an object, which is the configuration object. We're gonna have our client, which is the PG, the Postgres database. Then we have a version. In this case, I put 7.2. I'm not sure if I searched it. I'm pretty sure this is not my version, but the code runs, so I'm happy with that. You may have to tweak it for more advanced functionality. And then the next part will be the connection data. So we're gonna use the host, the user, the password, and the name that we set up in our .env file. So you can type connection, colon, curly braces, and you need to have a key called host, a key called user, and I'm going on a new line to give you time to catch up, and then database. So these are your 4 keys, and so you want to pass them through process. So the first one will be the host, and you pass it through process.env.db_host. The second one is the user, and you can pass through process.env.db_user. The third one is the password, and you pass it through process.env.db_password. And the last one is the database, which you can pass through process.env.db_database or db_name, which makes most sense. So if you need to figure out your credentials, 99%, the host will be localhost, the user will be Postgres, the name is the database that you created with me a few minutes ago. The password instead is something that you set up when you first set up your database. So you may have to remember that, and it may get a little bit annoying on that end. So let me see the chat for any quick question. I'm gonna start sharing again the .env file, and the setup doesn't look like there's any question. I would recommend, even if the database side is gonna be the part where you're gonna have the most friction, from my experience, this part will require you multiple Googles. You're gonna have to search multiple stuff. Unfortunately, it's just the way it is when you have to set up new tech. While the route stuff should be fairly straightforward and shouldn't require that many searches unless you're looking for more advanced customization. So I'm gonna keep going, and feel free to ask me any question if you have them. The last thing I'll do is I'll just module.exports. Next. So at this point we have our database and we have access to it. This code is not running, so we can test it. In order to test it, we're gonna need to put this on a route. So that's what I wanna get us to as fast as we can. So let's type npm run dev, which is the way to run the development mode. And then let's go in the routes, products. And then let's write in here a quick way to access our database. So first of all, let's get the database. Const db equals require of the db, which is the way we import the database. And then on line 9, let's retrieve the results. So const result is going to be equal, actually results, is going to be equal to await db.select, which is the way to select the entire, or select star. You're basically selecting star, so selecting everything. And then you're also putting a name of the table. So db.select.table, and provide the name of the table, which in our case is going to be products. So we expect to retrieve an empty array. And on line 10, let's res.send results. So let's see if it's going to explode or not. It looks like it's exploding because we're using await. Await is a keyword that may be new to you, so I'm going to spend a minute explaining that. But basically, there are particular functions or particular things that are asynchronous. So something, an operation can be either synchronous or it could be asynchronous. Something synchronous is something that happens, you can look at it as a cause effect in real time. So if you add a number, the number is changed. If you replace a text, the text is changed immediately. It happens synchronously. It happens directly. However, there are other types of operations which are asynchronous, which means that they start when you tell them to start, but they may end at a time that you're not certain of. And whenever you're dealing with databases, APIs, servers, you're always dealing with asynchronous operations. And that's because you are here. Your database in this case is in a fake server, in a virtual server, because it's on localhost. But your real database will be far away from you. So you're gonna need to take the time to instantiate a connection, send your request to the database, have the database process it, have the database access the data that you required through the request, and then create a new connection to you, and then send you back the data. So all of that stuff will take time. And since it takes time and you don't know when it's going to end, you don't know exactly when it's going to be ready, it's an asynchronous operation. And you can deal with asynchronous operation by using a special keyword called .then, which leads you to what are called the .then chain, the promises chain, or you can use what are called async await. The most newbie-friendly approach, or honestly the most friendly approach ever for everyone, is the async await approach. Because by using async in your function and using the keyword await in front of a function that will normally be asynchronous, you're turning it, quote unquote turning it, into a synchronous function. So what's going to happen is that if you do console.log here, I'm before the request, and then you do a console here, I'm after the request. If you put the await keyword here, your logs will run only once this promise is done. So basically you can imagine this as you're here in the server, you send to the DB, and then the DB sends back to you. So this will resume execution only once the request comes back. Alternatively, if you don't use the await keyword, your request, this second part, basically this part right here, will actually run as soon as it can, because JavaScript is a single-threaded language, and so it's not gonna wait for the promise. Although I guess you wouldn't wait for the promise even in a multi-threaded language. But hopefully you get the point. With await, you turn this into a quote-unquote synchronous operation. You basically convert it to a more simple to grasp approach. So let's see if the code compiles, which is my concern with the database setup. I'm gonna go make a request on /products, and we receive back a square bracket, which is an awesome sign. So I'm gonna look at the chat to see if there's any quick question. It looks like there are no questions, and feel free to post the questions at any time. I'll come back to answer them. But basically we were able to retrieve this object, or rather to make a request to the database and get back nothing. So before we get started with the post and all this stuff, we want to figure out if our request makes any sense. I highly, like, I'm mirroring the way I taught myself how to work with PG so that you can mirror that approach. So instead of going straight to the post request, which is what we did in the CRUD, we wrote the post, let's hold on that for a second. Let's add a entry manually in the database and ensure that our GET request actually works. This way, once we're done with the GET request, we're 100% done. We don't have to go back. So that's a good advice on keeping your work clean and avoiding opening multiple threads. So I'm gonna go on products, and I'm gonna right click, and I'm gonna click on view and edit data. And even this one is a little weird when you're working with PG admin. You're gonna right click on products, you're gonna click on view and edit data, all rows, and then now you can actually add your row. So you can add a text, and the text will be a complete Strapi course. And the price would be, let's say, $14.99. So it's going to be $14.99. So now we're going to save by clicking on this thing right here. You can also write a query if you want, but you can just click on this thing, and now your data is being saved, and now you have an entry in the database. So let's try and go on Postman, make a request, and we got back our data. So at this point, we were successfully able to make our GET request. So before we get to the POST request, since we already have some data, let's finish up the GET1 request. So let's go and set up our route with router.get/:id. Let's set it up as an asynchronous operation with request and response. And as by the way, let me know if you hear the fan noise, because that's why I'm keeping the computer far away from the microphone, to avoid the fan noise from the computer. But it's destroying my posture, so I'll definitely need to find a better solution. That said, at this point we have our get1 request. So we can do const curly braces id equals rec.params. So that way we retrieve our parameter. And then we can retrieve our product by running a where clause statement. So we can type const result is going to be equal to await of db, and then we select the table, which is called products, and then we type dot where, which is our where clause, and our where clause will receive an object for comparison, and our object will have a comparison of ID, which means that ID needs to be equal to the ID. So ID needs to be 1. So let's see if that works. We're gonna res dot send our result. So let's see what happens. We're gonna make a get request to /1, and we were successfully able to retrieve it. Something that you want to keep in mind is that by default, if you just write the code that I wrote, you're gonna get back a list instead of getting back a single object. If I'm not mistaken, you can use the dot first operator to receive only the first result. I don't see an example written by me, so perhaps I didn't. No, there you go. So if you type dot first, you're going to be able to retrieve that. However, I'm going to keep it this way just to keep the code clean. The code is get the parameter called ID, which is this thing right here. With the parameter called ID, make this request, tb products.where ID. And that's the beauty of using Next. You don't have to necessarily know all the details of working with a SQL database. You don't even need to write your queries. You can just do this simple operation and you're good to go. And typically speaking, at this point with Node.js, there shouldn't be that many security threats when it comes to writing statements, although don't quote me on that. However, if you write the ORM and you write it this way, you are sure that all of your queries are already escaped by the ORM. So instead of having to deal with escaping strings and ensuring that you can't inject, or you can basically authenticate yourself as the main user, if you just use the ORM, you already get safety out of the box, which is always a nice thing. So the next thing we'll do is create a new product. So let's go on line 21 with a router.post on slash, and again, a synchronous request. This is something that you've been like, I'm hurting my wrist writing the same thing over and over. And we're going to receive a couple of parameters from a rec.body. One of them is the name. The second one is the price, right? So obviously you can run further validation. However, the simple validation we're going to do is if not name. So if there's no name, we're going to return a 400. So res.status 400.send. Please add a name. And then if there's no price, we're gonna res.status 400.send. Please add a price. So this is our simple check. And by the way, if you want to use validation or more complete validation, don't roll your own. There's no point. You can just go on Google and type npm validate. And validate, the validate package, if I'm not mistaken, is really good. The Express validator, validate.js is famous too. Let me see if I can find my favorite one. Anyway, if you have a specific question on validation, let me know. Obviously, it's a deep topic, but you can see that this library, which is downloaded almost 4 million times, these people know it better than you. So don't try and write something better than them. Just use the validator.js library. Don't roll your own. There's no point. And not because you can't, it's just because it's a waste of time. So if you want to be effective, don't do it. So at this point, if we have the name and the price, then the next thing we'll do is just get the result, because we want to return it by convention, but we want to do an insert. So we can type const result is equal to await of db on our table called products. And then we're going to call an insert. And the insert will receive an object, which is the object that represents the columns in the table. So if our column is called name and our column is called price, you can just type name, comma, price. And since the name of the columns is equal to the name of the variables, we can just type this beautiful, simple shorthand, and then we can type returning star, which means that once the query is done, it returns what we wrote. And then we can just res.send the result. Let's see what happens there. I'm going to go on a post request on products, and I'm going to change the name to the secret to life. And I'm going to set the price to be $499.99. I'm not sure what happened there. And let's make the request. There we go. So now we have a new product. I can retrieve all of my product with a GET request, and you can see that we have 2 products. So the post request was successful, and in a minute I'm gonna do the put and the delete request. So let me know if you have any question, as I hit puberty with my voice. Okay, so we did a bunch of stuff. Again, let me know if you have any question and I'll answer it. Otherwise, I'm gonna keep going. The next thing is the router.put and the router.delete. So I'm gonna go with the router.put, which is gonna have a colon ID in our route, and then we're gonna have an asynchronous method which receive the request and the response. And what are we gonna do here? First of all, we need to get the rec.params, just like we did here on line 16. Const curly braces ID equals rec.params. Then you're going to retrieve the name and the price. So const curly braces name comma space price, which is something that you did here on line 22. They're gonna come from rec.body. Next up, we're going to since we don't know what to update on the object, let's create a quick and simple object so that we can keep track of what we need to update. So let's call it let to update equals curly braces. Sorry. And then let's do a check if there's no name and no price. So if not name and then not price, then return res.status 400.send. Please either have a name or a price. And then if there's a name, we can add that to the toUpdate. So toUpdate.name equals name. Then if there's a price, we can do the same approach. toUpdate.price equals toPrice. And now we have to call our query, and our query will be const updated is equals to await db products, and then we're gonna go on a new line to do a set of multiple dot notation methods. The first thing will be our where clause. So if you have written a SQL query, you will type select alter product where ID equals, and then you will set the value. And here is actually easier, to be honest. You can just type a where query where ID is equal, which is the operator, and then equal to ID, and then you will do dot update, and you just pass the object to update, and then you just specify the dot returning, so that way we have something to send back. And lastly, you just return it with res.send updated. So as you can see, when you're using Next, your life is way easier than actually having to write all of those queries. So from my point of view, as of now in 2020, if you haven't studied database queries, especially just writing the pure SQL, you don't have to learn it. From my experience, you're not gonna have to learn it unless your job is writing SQL queries. However, I would highly recommend that you learn the entity relationship model, which is the reason why SQL is looks like that, because the entity relationship model helps you with modeling real life data. So it helps you with setting up databases, setting up applications. So it's a very helpful model to see the world. Although I don't believe you're gonna need to learn SQL unless you want to. You can always learn it if you want to, but you're not gonna have to. I don't think I've written SQL in the past 5 years. because WordPress would abstract it away. You're abstracting it away here, or you're gonna be working with with MongoDB, so you're not even gonna use it. So that said, on the last path, the last route we have to write is the delete one. So let's write router.delete on colon ID with our usual rec and res, you know, rock and roll, rec and res. Then we're gonna get our parameters with const curly braces ID equals rec.params. Let me see. Okay. Rec.params, and then I'm gonna get the result and I send it back. So const result is gonna be equal to await of DB products. And again, what do we need to do? We need to find the products. So we're gonna do a dot where ID is equal to ID. And then we're gonna call the command delete, which is dot del. And then we're gonna get a dot returning star so that we return whatever we selected. And lastly, we're just gonna res dot send result. There we go. So at this point, we wrote all of the routes for creating, deleting, updating products. So I have all of my products. Let me see what's going on. Perhaps I made a typo. I'm seeing await products on line 64. Probably because I didn't write async here. So anytime you don't write async, you're gonna get the exception that you can only use an asynchronous function in an asynchronous method. So I have my two products, and you can see that now every time the server restarts, I still have my products. I can do a delete on /1 and I receive it back because that's how we wrote it. But if I do a get request, now we only have, it looks like we only have no product. No, my bad. If we do a get request on all of them, we're gonna get back number 2. So that's it. Now we can add multiple products. We can retrieve multiple products. We can retrieve one at a time. We can also update the price, and it's going to be consistent. So there we go. So I'm going to take a quick break, and if you have any question on dealing with your basic CRUD with your database, let me know now, and I'm going to answer them before going to the next section, which is going to be the authentication. So I'm going to go on a quick break. And we're back. At this point, we went through quite a lot, actually. We went through building a basic CRUD application with just normal routes and an ephemeral database. And then we actually built an actual CRUD with a database. So it's pretty cool. Congratulate yourself if you're able to follow through with the project and coding. The next thing that I want to show you is authentication. So authentication has multiple facets. There's multiple aspects to it, but one side will be storing the user with a technique called hash and salt. And then we're also going to have setting up Passport and using a local strategy as well as session to provide authentication to our user. We're going to then close and conclude the stream with a very quick example of setting up a templating engine. After we do that, we're going to run into a few frustrations that I believe are solved by using single page applications such as React. So that's where I'm going to stop with the Node.js side, because if you want to build things rapidly, I think that's where your Node.js side ends, and that's where you want to look into single page applications. So that's what I want to do. If you have any question at this point, I'm going to answer them. I very much appreciate your viewership, your few people that are following through. I very much appreciate that, and I'm gonna get started. So the first thing that we should be doing would be to just set up a quick table. So what is a user? I think I've written the notes, but a user is gonna be an ID, an email, a password, and a salt. And the reason why we need to store the salt, which some people like to store them separately, but the reason why we need to store the salt is because if you have a password and you have the salt, then you can figure out whether the password that is submitted by your user is the actual password. Well, if you only have the password but you have no salt, you're not going to be able to do that. We're going to be encrypting our own passwords for a cryptographically secure approach. We're literally going to get that from the Next.js team, so I'll show you in a second. I personally would avoid rolling my own authentication unless I actually have to. As of now, the tool that I would recommend the most is Magic Link or Auth0, even though they have considerable costs and most people are not willing to put up with that. However, I recommend using them professionally. As for just because of the the issues that may arise from using the password. So the disclaimer is that if you're storing password, you're doing it at your own risk. I would recommend avoiding that. And initially, that's what brought me to use Strapi. At this point, I wouldn't recommend using Strapi for authentication, although I would recommend using Strapi for everything else, because otherwise you're going to have to spend 3 hours teaching it, while the stuff that we did with Strapi, you literally get it in 3 minutes. So you would have saved yourself at least 3 hours of work, plus a bunch of filters and a lot of nice other stuff if you were to use Strapi.js. That said, let's get started with authentication. First thing will be to set up a table. So I'm going to go on the tables, right click, create table, and I'll create a new table called users. And we're going to have a few columns. The first column will be the ID, which is a serial. So I'm just going to call it big serial, and I'll set it as a primary key so that we can use it for foreign stuff if we were to continually expand on our example. The next part will be the email, because I like to just use the email, and we can put it as text. So let's just do a text. Next up, we're going to have the password, and the password is going to be a text as well. And lastly, we're going to use the salt, which is going to be a text as well. So that's how we're storing them. A security expert that sees this may give a different advice on using the text field for password. However, I believe that we're going to use a cryptographically secure approach. So to my understanding, what I'm going to be showing you is secure, and I would roll it this way. So I'm comfortable with using it and with showing it, although another expert may have a different opinion. So I'm very happy to have a debate. That said, the first thing we need to just do is find a way to insert a user in the table in a way that is secure. So the first thing we'll have to do is just set up a new file, just like we set up the other routes. So we can go here, we're gonna go in the routes, new file, let's call it auth.js. I'm gonna import. The first thing that I'll import will just be, or my bad, const, because we have common.js. So const express equals require of express. Then we're gonna get a router, const router. The reason why I'm going a little faster is because at this point this is a boilerplate. Like we have to write it every time, so I'm not copying and pasting it just because it's a tutorial. But if I was doing it professional, I would just copy and paste the code. So at this point, that's the first part, just to set up our routes. Let's set up a route for registering the user. So we can do router.post on /register. And it's going to be an asynchronous method with rec and res. And this is kind of the moment of truth. So we're going to have an email and a password. And they're going to come from rec.body. And then again, if we don't have an email, we're going to return. Yeah, we're going to return in this case because we want to just cut the execution early. We're going to return a res.status of 400. And we're going to send, please add a valid email. Although this validation is very light, you would probably want to use a validation library if you're going to validate this email and password, because this specific code will take basically anything as email and password. Then we're going to return res.status 400.send, please have a password. And now for the moment of truth, and the credits go to the example with Passport that comes from the Next.js team. So if you search for Next.js example, you should see a repo with the Passport example. So that's literally from them. So, and I took it because it's super recent code, so I can trust them with their solution. The first thing we're gonna need to do is import the crypto package, which is a package that is there by default for Node.js. So let's import it by typing const crypto equals require of crypto. So that way we have our package with cryptographically secure methods. And then the next thing we'll do will be generating a salt. Const salt equals crypto dot random bytes. We're gonna get 16 of them dot toString hex. So we're gonna convert them in hexadecimal bytes. Then we're gonna get an hash of our password. So we're gonna type crypto dot pbkdf sync. So it means that it's a synchronous operation. It's gonna receive the password. It's gonna take the salt. We're gonna add a parameter of 1000 and then 64. And I'm guessing, I'm not actually sure what the 64 is. And then we're gonna have a cryptographic function that will digest it. So we're gonna use the SHA-512, and then we're gonna toString in hex, in hexadecimal. So at this point, this is your cryptographically secure password. Now it's been encrypted in a way that is secure. So the next thing will be to check if a user already exists. So const already equals to await db, where I think we still need to import the db. So since I mentioned the db now, I'm gonna go up here and I'm gonna import it. So const db equals require /db, and then we're gonna call db users dot where, and we're just gonna compare the email. So if they have the same email, then that's them. And we're gonna get the dot first, so we have access to the first result instead of getting a list. And we're gonna do if already, then we're gonna return a 400. So res dot status 400, and then dot send user already exists. So the reason why you need to do first here is because an array will always evaluate to true. So if we do first, then if the user doesn't exist, we get null or false. We get null if I'm not mistaken. And so we always get a falsy value. So that's why we do that. Otherwise, we're going to insert the user. So we do const insert equals to await db users dot insert. And we're going to be inserting the user with their current email, the password set to the hash. And then we also need to store the salt so that we can then revalidate the password later. And then we're gonna use returning, and we're just gonna return something. So we're not gonna return everything. Let's actually format it this way. And we're gonna dot returning, instead of star, we're gonna pass an array of strings that specifies the keys. So we're gonna return the ID of the user, and we're gonna retrieve the email. So that way we can return that, and we're gonna return it by typing res.send insert. So that way we return the recently added user. And I'm gonna leave this on the screen for a second. You can check it out. Again, I got this from the Next.js, with Passport demo. So that's where I got it. So that's my attribution to the open source code. And it's a fairly, I'm fairly certain this is a safe approach. This the SHA-512 doesn't have as many rainbow tables as lower byte solutions, although a crypto expert may disagree with me. So at this point we created our authentication. So we have a way basically to register the user. We want to roll a way to authenticate the user, and in order to do that we need to introduce Passport. So I'm gonna go, as I start to get attacked by mosquitoes, I'm gonna go on Google Chrome and I'll search for Passport.js. And Passport.js, when it was launched, had what was considered one of the best documentations. From my experience, the documentation is really confusing. I personally don't find it that clear. So hopefully I'm gonna make a better job, at least from the way I perceive it, because you may have a different opinion. But hopefully I do a job in making it very simple for you to understand what's going on and what you need to do. And most of the times, whenever you're dealing with Passport, you're just gonna have to basically create a separate file where you instantiate Passport, and then you're gonna have to set it up, and then you're gonna have to hook it up to your server. So that's exactly what we're gonna be doing. There are tons of what are called strategies, and strategies are ways in which you can engage with Passport in different ways. You have the HTTP bearer, the Google, you have the JWT, you have auth0, you have the local. Local being the way to deal with username and password, which is the current setup that we're using. So at this point, I'm gonna have you install a couple of packages. I'm gonna install Passport, and I'm gonna install the local strategy. So type npm I passport, and then the second package will be passport-local. So these are your two strategies, or excuse me, the Passport middleware and the actual strategy. So let's go and resume the execution with npm run dev. And then I'm gonna go in the code, and what I'll do is I'll commit so that it's easier to see the changes. So git add dot git commit -m created CRUD with DB as well as sign up. And we could test the sign up, by the way, would be a good idea. So just to avoid seeing if there's any bug. So what I'll do before using Passport is I'll test the sign up. So I'll do a post request on /auth. Okay, so now I'm realizing that I may have not imported it, so my bad. That's why I had to test it. So at this point, I'm going line 6, const auth equals require of ./auth, which is the code we spent a few minutes writing. So this code right here. So now we have it in our routes. Let's set it up with router.use single quote /auth and the auth route. So now we have that. Let's make a request with post /auth/register with the email. I'll just type v@g.com, and 123 will be my password. See what's going on. So it looks like router.user. My bad, I made a typo. So it's router.use. The app is now working. Let's make my post request. Again, body raw JSON, post /auth/register, email and password. Boom. The user is registered. So now if I try and register a second user with the same email, I'm gonna get an exception. And I'm seeing cannot set headers after they are sent to the client. That's actually that actually happens when you send stuff multiple times. And I think it's because I didn't put a return here. So on line 26, I need to do a return because otherwise the rest of the code will still run. So I think this last user was actually still inserted even though they technically shouldn't have, because I forgot the user. So now instead, now that I have the return statement, they're not gonna insert a new user, and I'm gonna get back the user already exists error message, which I believe provides a decent advice. Although remember that for an attack of brute force, telling that a specific email already has a user is actually providing a potential attacker with more information that you may not wanna disclose. So you could also return a more generic message. That may also be a way to obfuscate, but again, that's up to you. So at this point, the next step is to just set up Passport. We're gonna set it up in a separate file. So I'm gonna create a new folder called off, and I'll create a new file called index.js. And in index.js, I'm gonna need to retrieve Passport with const passport equals require of Passport. So this is the clue of the session. This is the most important thing that I'm gonna teach you today. And then I'm gonna get my local strategy, which is the way in which we validate username and password. And I'm gonna get it by requiring passport -local dot strategy. The next thing I'll do is basically I'm gonna tell you about how we set up Passport. So Passport is basically a middleware. It's basically a set of functionality that, just like the middleware that we set up in the server.js, is gonna do a bunch of stuff, and then it's gonna call next. Specifically, it's going to look if we are submitting a username and password, and if we are, it's going to log the user in. Alternatively, it's gonna check if the user already is in a session. So basically they have a cookie that shows them that they are who they are, and I'll get to that later. But if they do, then Passport will modify the rec object to add a parameter called rec.user. So that way you can keep track of the user object. So that's kind of what Passport does. And in order to do that, you need to set up two functions that are really key. They're called serialize user and deserialize user. So the idea of serialization is something that comes in multiple places, but it comes, for example, in sending data through the web, or it comes when you're learning about storing save files in video games, such as when you do Unity or Unreal Engine tutorials. That's where serialization comes in place. And serializing basically means converting some piece of data into something that can be passed around. So in the simplest example of serialization is something that you may have already done, which is JSON.stringify. So whenever you JSON.stringify, you're serializing the data so you can send it around. So in this case, instead, we're gonna basically be serializing the user by finding something that can be passed around to identify them. And in our case, it's gonna be the user ID. So we're gonna go and type passport.serialize user, and it's gonna receive a function that receives the user, and then it receives another callback called done. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna call done. We're gonna pass null here because this is the error object, and then we're gonna return user.id. And I know that this sounds very foreign, but as you keep working with Passport, this will become very normal. Basically, you're just internally, Passport is tracking the user through using the user ID. That's what's happening. The next part will be the deserialize user, which is the way that once you have a user, you have a token that you serialize so you can keep track of the user. You have the deserialize user so that you can access the user data. And whenever you're accessing user data, you want to remember that the way we set up our database is that we have a couple of columns that are very private. We have the password column and we have the salt column, and we don't want to share them even internally. So that's why I'm going to do what I'm about to show you. We're going to write passport.deserialize user, which is the method for which, again, we turn the serialized user, just the ID, into data that we can actually use. We're going to receive an asynchronous operation, which will have an ID because that's what we're passing here. And then we're going to have the done method that we can call once we're done. Then we're going to have a try catch because this time we can throw and it may have bad consequences.
And whenever we throw, we're just gonna do a done, and the first parameter is the error parameter, so we're just gonna pass it here as the first parameter, just like we didn't do it here because it works. In this case, when we have an error, we're gonna pass it there. And then in the try, we're gonna try and retrieve the user. So we can do const user equals await db, which is something that we don't know what we have to get. So let's go line 4 and import the db with const db equals require dot slash db, and we can await db users dot where we're gonna get the ID, which is the thing we serialized and we're receiving here, and then dot first, so that way we have access to the object. This is something that can throw. So, or actually the next line, which is const curly braces email equals user, this can throw. So that's why we need to have the catch. And once we have success, instead we can call done with a null error object, and we can pass back the ID and the email. And this way we can internally keep track of the user that is currently logged in without even leaking our password or other stuff. So that's why we are just passing the ID and the email. The ID because it's convenient to have the ID of the logged in user, it's always convenient, and the email because that may also be convenient if you want to render the email, which is something that you'll be doing later. So now that we set up password serialized user and deserialized user, which is something that it's in the tutorial as well, so you can look up here, you basically will see that the serialized and deserialized user are the most important functions that you have to set up. So the next step is to set up Passport to use these methods. So that's the third part. First part, serialize the user, how to pass the user around on the web. Deserialize user, once you have a token that represents a user, how do you fetch it? That's how you do it. And then the third part is set up Passport to use these functions and do a little extra. So we're gonna type passport.use, and we're gonna pass it the new local strategy, which means that we're initializing a new object from the local strategy, which is up here. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna pass a couple of configuration to the local strategy. We're gonna type the username field, which is gonna be the email. That's why we need to do it, because I've changed that so that you can log in with an email rather than having to type username. That's how you do it, by the way, because every other tutorial shows you username. I hate that. I don't like usernames. Just use the email to log in. That's how you do it. And then the password field will just be password. So we're good on that. This is gonna be the end of the local strategy setup. However, we still have to pass more stuff. And basically, we have to pass a function for logging the user in, which is the second parameter. I'm looking at my own code. Yeah, it's the second parameter that we're passing to the local strategy. So this would be an asynchronous function that receives the username, which we can just call email because that's what we did. Then it receives the password and it receives done. And if you put true here, if you call done, null, and user, or basically you pass an ID, this is how you log in everybody as some user. So this is how you basically bypass your authentication. This is how you screw everything up. If you return this, anybody's gonna be authenticated. So that's a potential security threat. So you have to take that seriously. You wanna avoid that. So the first thing we'll do is we'll retrieve the user. User equals to await db users dot where, and we're just gonna get the email from that user, right? So let's find a user that has that email. If there's no user, it means that they're doing something wrong. So we can just return done, null, and false. So there's no user. And we can also pass a third parameter, which is the message. And our message can be incorrect email or password. And we're gonna do this message that is generic so that a potential attacker doesn't know whether it's the email or the password, because we're gonna repeat the same error message for a wrong email. Although you know internally that this is when the user doesn't exist, so it's the wrong email. Next up, let's verify the password, and we're gonna need to import the crypto package. So let's go up here and let's do const crypto equals require crypto. And once we have a crypto package, we can do const hash is equal to crypto dot, and this is pbkdf choosing, and we're gonna do password user dot salt 1000 and then 64 and then sha 512 and then dot toString hex. So basically we're running the same process that we ran to encrypt the password, but this time is from the password provided by the request. And then we're gonna do a simple comparison. So const password match is equal to user.password triple equal to hash. If hash and user password are the same, then it's true. So now if not passwords match, we're going to return an error. So we can type return done, again, null, false, and then a message, incorrect, email, or password. And you typically want to have literally the same message. You want to copy and paste it so that again you avoid giving any clue to a potential attacker. That's why you would repeat. And then instead, if the password matches, then you can finally return you're done with null and the user. And that's how the user logs in. So once you do this, your user is now able to log in. The last thing you want to do is module dot exports of passport. So now this updated password that has the local strategy, the deserialized user, the serialized user is now the passport that we're going to actually be using. So I'm going to keep this file up here for a couple of seconds, and in the meantime I'm going to check if there's any quick question in the chat. Thank you very much for your support. It says I'm looking forward to taking your Strapi course. Thank you very much. This is basically my goal, is to show you why you should use Strapi, and at the same time I also wanted to just get it off my bucket list. So this way there's a Node.js course online that I wrote. It's very fast-paced, very straightforward, hopefully. And if you have any quick question on this, let me know. Basically, we're just setting up our passport, and now we're gonna attach it to a specific route so that it actually works. Okay, so I'm gonna resume. Again, if you have any question, let me know. At this point, we're getting close to the end of the stream. We're getting close to getting everything done. So we wanna finalize this. I'm gonna do a commit here, git commit -m. Passport is initialized, right? Is set up properly, but we still have to hook it up to the system. So we're gonna go on server.js, and we need to import it. So let's do const passport equals require of /off. So now we have passport here, and we're going to type after our middlewares here in this area where we have all of our middlewares. We're gonna type app.use, because it's gonna use passport, passport.initialize, which is the way for you to make it so the password works. And then you're also going to use app.use passport.session. And that's so that passport uses session, which we still haven't talked about, we still haven't set it up, but it's going to use session so that once you logged in once, you're going to be logged in until the session ends. At this point, we don't have any sessions set up, so that means that the data will be lost after every call. However, we can still use this to log in, and that's my point. So now that we set up passport, I want to show you that you can log in, and I want to show you that you're not able to maintain a session, which is a very important concept. So I want you to take this step of not getting it completely right, because now it's not usable, but now it's still working. So I want to show you that. So let's go on the off page, my bad, on the off route. So I'm going to close everything else. I'm going to go in the routes, auth.js. We have our register route. We have to create our login route. So router.post /login. We're going to have basically, interesting enough, we're going to basically be using our passport.authenticate. So basically we're gonna import passport. So let's go here on line 6 and type, actually let's go here on line 9. Const passport is gonna be equal to require of the slash off module. And basically we're gonna basically have a third parameter here, which is gonna be our middleware. And we're gonna type passport.authenticate local. And basically this is how you authenticate with Passport through a route. And I think it's really weird. I think it's just weird, but it is what it is. And basically it means that you now have a middleware that will check if you pass the email and the password parameters. And if it goes through, then it's gonna return a successful message. So now we can do console.log rec.user. And if the user is logged in, thanks to the passport call, you're gonna see this. Otherwise, you're gonna see nothing. And we can type res.send OK. And if we ever get here, it means because passport was successful in authenticated. So it will always work. And if it doesn't work, you're gonna see an error message coming off of passport. So that's why we can always send OK at any time. So at this point, let's check the terminal. It looks like it's running. I have my off register. I'm just gonna change it to off login. I have my email and my password. Let's make my post request. And I was able to log in. And you can see that I have my ID, my email, my password, and my salt. So I was able to successfully log in, and the rec here is passing a user that is a complete user. And the reason why I want you to notice that is that if we go here and we look at the login, we are returning the user here, which we get from this login or from this fetch in the database. So if you instead want to return just the email and the password, you could probably just return ID, user.id, and then email, and that would be it. So this way you could keep the same reasoning that I mentioned. However, you probably wouldn't send this back to the user. So, and let me show you what happens, by the way. You see that now we only get that. So for this specific use case, it's fine to return the user because you're never gonna send it back. You don't have to send back the user after the successful login. But if you were to send back the user, I guess you need to you need to sanitize it. Otherwise, you're gonna send back the hashed password, which is not a good practice. So that's it. The last route that is gonna show you why we need sessions is going to be the /me route, which we're gonna take straight up from Strapi, the way Strapi works. So we're gonna type router.post on /me. We're gonna have a rec and a res. And you can type console.log rec.user. And you can also const curly braces user equals rec. And you can just return that res.send user. So we can just get the user and send it back. And what happens here is that if I make my request, if I log in, okay, so I'm logged in, I'm 100% logged in. There is no way to deny it. And I actually saw a bunch of students of mine do this, by the way. So I'm logged in, but now I go on /me, and you're going to be confused because I'm not logged in. You're going to be like, what? What's going on? I lost my authentication. And that's exactly what happens because you didn't implement a way to keep track of your session. So that means that you're logged in through this application. You're logged in only as long as you pass the email and password and as long as Passport authenticates you. So you always have to send back email and password every time, which is a waste of time because you actually need to set up a vehicle for passing your session. So I'm gonna set this up for a second. I'll leave the screen here if you need to get any of this code. I don't know what this is. And I'll check for any quick question. Looks like we don't have any question. Feel free to ask any question if you have them. And I'm gonna just take a quick break to drink. And what we're gonna do next is we're gonna set up the session so that once you log in, you're actually gonna be remembered. So this next part of the live stream will be make it so that they remember you. Remember that you have access to the source code in GitHub. So at any time, if you feel lost, feel free to ask a question, or you can just use GitHub and check the code. The code is open source. You can use it for whatever you want. Personally, I like going up until this point with Node.js, and then I would use React for your front end. You can add a proxy, and that way you're good to go. You're going to have amazing authentication and a decent setup for your database and CRUD. So it's definitely excited about Strapi. Thank you, man, for your support. Definitely Strapi is the way to go. If you're a solopreneur or small business, you just want to build something, definitely highly recommend Strapi. I have a course, it's called the Complete Strapi course. There's a very new section on plugin development if you're interested in getting into that. This is definitely the moment to get into Strapi if you're interested, and it will only get better. So for the next 2 years, Strapi is on the up and up, so I definitely could recommend you using it. Although I also recommend taking this 3-hour live stream completely for free. Just go through the 3 hours of exercises so that way you know how to use Node.js, and then you can choose not to. So you're no longer compensating for weakness. So I definitely recommend doing that as well. So I'm gonna wait a second for any quick question. Otherwise, we're gonna set up sessions. Okay, let's set up sessions. Basically, we need to find a way to make it so that after you authenticate, you are remembered. At this point, you're currently not remembered by the server. And that's because we don't have what is called a session. Session is probably the most important invention when it comes to the web, beside Ajax, because session allows you to be uniquely identified by the server. That makes it so that if you make a request, the server knows who you are, and as such, it can customize the response so that you can get back something that belongs to you. This idea is very important because the HTTP protocol for servers makes it so that the HTTP protocol is stateless, in the sense that if you make a request, you're making the request at that time, you're sending a request, and then the server sends you back a document, and then the connection is closed. So that means that any chat that you see on the internet, even a stream, anything that you interact with is an illusion that has been built by very smart people to make you feel as if there is a live connection. But the reality is that every time you are creating a connection, you're getting stuff through the request, you're making a request through the connection, you get the stuff, and then it's done. This connection is closed. So the session is the way in which you maintain the identity, you maintain that continuity. So imagine having to log in on YouTube every time you go to it. You would probably not even use it. So that's why sessions are so important. And that's kind of why JWT versus session still makes sessions win, because it's that important to just continue that login and at the same time provide a safe experience for everyone. Because the problem you'll have if you work with JWT is that you probably will make a mistake in storing it, which is like super common. But again, one day I'll just spend a month at hacking every single website that uses local storage for JWTs, so that I'll show everybody why JWTs are not secure. But up until this point, you're gonna have to trust me on that. So trust me on that. And that said, let's set up sessions. Sessions can actually be set up in a million of ways. I remember teaching about using cookies, but there's actually a new plugin or a different package called Express-Session. This used to be a part of Express. Now it's external. You have to install it. But basically, it provides a way to set up your session, and you can use it in conjunctions with other tools. In our case, we're just going to set up session in the most basic ways, and then you can go through the documentation and see if you need to go any deeper. So let's start by just installing it by typing npm I express-session. Then we can restart the server with npm run dev. And the next thing we'll do will be to set up our session middleware. So I'm gonna go on Git for a second, and our git add dot git commit -m added passport off, so that way the entirety of the tree is clean. Let's keep going with opening up the server.js and importing our session middleware. So I'm gonna go, actually it's yeah, I'm gonna go line 5. I'll type const session is equal to require of express dash, too difficult, express dash session, and then we're gonna initialize it. So in our middleware section here on line 20, let's do an app.use session, and session will receive an object for configuration. We're gonna have a secret, which we probably wanna pass as process.env session secret. So let's do that, or the secret. Let's just do this to avoid spending a lot of time. This is a very common pattern, by the way, is the or, the pipe or to pass a parameter for defaulting. It's something that you typically use for API URLs. Then we're gonna have resave set to true. If I'm not mistaken, I'll go over the docs to comment on this, just to avoid saying something that is wrong. So I'll type save and initialize set to false, so that if a session is not set up properly, or at the beginning of a session we don't even save it because we don't care. And lastly, we'll have a cookie, and cookies will have a setting of secure, and we're gonna have secure only if we're in production, which you can check by doing process.env.node_env set to production. So this is the way in which you know whether you're in production or not. And in this case, we're not in production, so we're not going to use secures. If we were to use secure, we wouldn't be able to debug because localhost doesn't provide HTTPS, or at least not by default. Let me quickly check the docs for resave and save and initialize, because I don't remember what they do. Resave forces the session to be saved back to the session store, even if the session was never modified during the request. I think we needed this because otherwise you're gonna run into a race condition where Passport wouldn't work. So that's why I set it to true, although most applications don't have it set to true. And then save uninitialized, let me see real quick. Forcing a session that is uninitialized to be saved, what is new but not modified. Yeah, we have no reason to save a session that is not changed, because we're saving sessions for Passport, so there's no point in us saving this. That's why it's set to false. So this is set to false because it makes no sense to save it, and then this is set to true so that Passport works properly because of a race condition. Different setups may require different tweaks here, so you just want to play with them to see whether it's working or not. So at this point, I'm actually gonna put these two middlewares below so that we're sure that in the chain of middlewares, because a middleware, remember, is just a function that does a bunch of stuff and then it calls next. I just wanna make sure that the session is set up before Passport. That's why I wanna do that. And then let's see what happens if I do a /login. So I'm gonna make a post request to /login. I got okay, I see cookies now, and I see connect session ID, blah, blah, blah. And we're seeing HTTP only set to true and secure set to false. And that's pretty good as a setup. So now I'm gonna make a request to /me. And now, thanks to the fact that we have session cookies, I got back the ID and the email. Notice that you get these back through the passport.deserialize user. So if you change this to is this from server set to true, and you reload the application and you start a new session and you log in again, you'll see that this is the thing you're getting back. You're getting back the stuff from deserialize user. So that's very important that you keep that in mind, because it's proof that your rec.user comes from your deserialize user, while the user that you get immediately from Passport comes from this function right here. So hopefully, through working through this example with me, you now have a deeper understanding of how Passport works. You have the serialize user, which is the way through which you pass the ID of a user through the connection. Then you have the deserialize, which is the way in which you fetch that data when you need it. And then you have your setup for logging in And you have these custom options here if you need to use email instead of username, which I personally hate using username. So that's why I had to do that. So at this point, I think I covered the majority of the stuff. Probably the extra or latest thing we can cover related to Passport will be to have a quick middleware that ensures that the user is logged in. And honestly, the simplest middleware is to just type const is user logged in. Is gonna be a middleware that receive res, rec, and next. And we're gonna do if rec, oh my bad, this is rec and then res. So if rec.user, then we're gonna return next. And then otherwise, you're just gonna return res.status for 302 or 301. I'm gonna Google it to be sure. Was it a 403? I'm pretty sure it's actually a 403. Yeah, 403. So we're gonna return a 403.send you are not authorized. So now you can just take these user logged in. You can let's actually put this in server.js just to avoid any issues. But basically you can write this middleware here. You can put it wherever you want. So let's say this /second request, we want to only allow it for user logged in. So now we pass it here. And if I make my request for a new tab on get http //localhost 3001/second, I will get you are not authorized. While if I do the same get request in this tab, which has been logged in and it contains the cookie, apparently I am also unauthorized. That's lame. Let me see why. And the simplest way to debug will be to log the name and just see what rec is. Thank you for subscribing. Definitely the rec seems to be there. So let's look at the rec.user. Also, we may need to relog in. So we can do auth/login, make a post request. Boom. Let's ensure that it's logged in by looking at me. It is. So now let's make the get request to /second. There you go. So now you've seen that the middleware is protecting a route. If I do the same request here, you'll see that it actually is working. Let's see why. Probably because I have my cookie. Yeah, I do. So you can see that let's do it for the browser just to make sure that we're on the same page. If I make it here, it's gonna tell me that I'm unauthorized because I didn't log in. So this is the part where you will be like, well, Alex, you showed me APIs, you show me authentication, bro, you gotta show me how to render HTML. And I will actually show you how to get started with that, although it's gonna get really complicated and really frustrating really fast. And so me personally, I literally quit on working on that because I thought it would be too boring, honestly. So my recommendation is that you take what I just taught you. I'm gonna show you how to generalize the route so that you have a /API route. And then I'm gonna send you a document in the chat so that you can continue developing and you can use a React application for your front end. So that's the next step. I'm gonna show you how to set up. Should we use Firebase? I'm pretty sure Firebase is more expensive than. Now you can use this solution that I showed you, man, for authentication. This is the way you do authentication properly. You could use Firebase. I'm not sure what the cost on Firebase would be. Firebase authentication pricing. So 10,000, I'm pretty sure 10,000 off on Auth0 are free as well. No? And you also have magic.link, which is my recommended 10 grand, 10,000 10,000 users is 228. Active is basically re-logged in at least twice. Let's see. 1,000 active users for $80 a month. Yeah, I mean, it really depends on your budgeting. I personally think that even at 100 or $200 a month, they are worth it. But it really depends, because I've been working freelance and online for years. So for me to spend $200 for a new project for 1 month or two and see whether it flies or not is actually fair. I remember at a time where it wasn't, where I couldn't afford it. So you can definitely look into that. You could also use Strapi for authentication, or you can just roll this, because this will work for authentication as well. So whichever solution you prefer. At this point, let's quickly look at a templating engine. And the most common templating engine is called EJS. EJS, which means embedded JavaScript, is basically the equivalent of writing PHP with JavaScript. So that's as simple as it goes. I had multiple students have a lot of issues with EJS, and I think it's taught in many universities where they have you build full stack applications with both Node.js backend and EJS as the front end. My experience is that they spent a lot of time spinning their wheels building something that was too complicated. My recommendation instead is to search for the Burgess tutorial on Dev2 on React and Express, which is something that I teach in a couple other videos. And honestly, if this video gets 100 likes, I'll do a second live stream where now we build the back end. I'll show you how to build the front end if we get to 100 likes. So share it on Twitter and to your friends, and create a few accounts. Just, put the like button, and I'll do that. But basically, if you follow the Nicola Burgess tutorial, it shows you how to set up React to be served by an Express server, which is basically what we built. So that way you can use the authentication that I just showed you. So you can pay $0 on authentications for 10 million users or whatever. So that's how you will do it though. But today I'm just gonna show you real quick the EJS. So you will, first of all, do we even need to install anything? I think we do need to install EJS. Yes, we do. So we can install EJS by tapping npm I EJS. And then you will restart with npm run dev. And then you will set the templating engine here, or actually let's put it above the use with app.set view engine set to EJS. And basically the second you do that, you should get, you may get a few exceptions. The first thing we're gonna have to do now is, instead of render stuff, which I'll get to in a second, we want to prefix all of our routes with a prefix. So at this point, we have this. We have a line 38, we say /routes. So the way you avoid having a clash between your view routes, which are views, which are HTML stuff, and your API, is that you put a prefix. And the simplest prefix is /API. So instead of having to log in with, or even get this with just /, I'm gonna have to do /API /products, okay? Or /API /off /login. That's how you log in now. And it's not a GET request, it has to be a POST request, okay? So I'm gonna delete these because they're annoying. And in the example, I put them in a separate route, but I don't think it's gonna be educational to show that. So I'm not gonna do it. And I'll just show you this comment here. This is middleware to ensure user is logged in, as my voice is about to crack. So the next thing will be to show you how to render a page. So I'm gonna do app.get on /. I'm just gonna do a rec, my bad, and res. And I'm going to send basically with res.render, and I can specify a page under the views folder. So I can type pages /index, and now you're gonna see that I get, I'm pretty sure we're gonna get an exception when I go to localhost 3001, because there is no such thing as views pages index, and that's because you gotta create a new folder by default called views, and then you can create a subfolder because I specified here as pages, but technically we can just do index, and we can do a index.html. My bad. This has to be a index.ejs. And now we have an EJS file that we can show. By convention, you wouldn't do this. By convention, you will do new folder, pages. So you would have your page for your home page, and then you would have what are called partials. And I'm going to show you that very briefly in a second. So in here, in the app.get, we're going to do pages/index. So that way the code still works. And then I can go on index.ejs. You can type your doc type stuff, all of your nice HTML, etc., etc. We're gonna write barely functioning HTML, but now you can type, for example, in H1. This is the home page. And you will be able to render it. This opens up a can of worms of server-side rendering, fetching data, displaying stuff, displaying the user, displaying a bunch of things. So honestly, we could start working on this, but the reality is that it's gonna get massively more complicated the more we work on it. The only thing I'll show you extra here is that you should be able to render stuff. So you should be able to pass an object here, such as data, and then you can pass a list of numbers, for example. Let's just pass a string for now. And passing this object makes it so that you can use a syntax of $, percentage, dash, and then the name of the value, which is data, and you should be able to render it. Let's see if that works. So we're seeing object. So I think it's because it's going to be data.data. No? Let me see if I have an example here that I can pull out. User.email. Why will data be like this? I'm going to briefly look at the docs. EJS people, and then you just render with people, blah, blah, blah. So I have an example that is working in GitHub. I'm just gonna quickly comment that. It's here, and it's in the code that you have access to in the folder. But I'm not gonna pretend like I'm an expert in this. I stopped after a couple of pages because I thought it was really frustrating. It brought me back my PTSD of developing PHP. So in the example that I built, we basically include a partial, which is a way for us to have just a footer or a header and include them in multiple pages. And then we pass it some data, and then we can show in the partial, for example, in the header, we can show the user by just typing if user, then user.email. So basically, I'm guessing the only thing that is different here is the equal here. So let's see if that's the case. No, I'm still getting let's see if this works. I'm getting object, and yeah, I guess I'll leave it as this me struggling to fix the EJS stuff. But anyway, if you want to go deeper, I'm sure there's great tutorials on EJS. I would not recommend going through the EJS pile at all. What we did today is we built a JSON API with modern conventions, with authentication, with session management. Most of it is even secure, and we have a database, and you have CRUD routes, and they're all prefixed by a /API. So the next step that I would recommend you taking will be to learn about create React app, which by the way I teach in, let's see. You can just go on my channel and you can look at the video Introduction to React, which is it's over 1 hour and 40 minutes of working with React. It's this one, Learn React with Hooks by Building Projects. In this one, you're gonna go from literally installing the thingy to actually developing all of it. And it's not only it's also a slower pace because it's recorded instead of being live. So it has a little easier of a learning curve. And my recommendation would be to do this tutorial, then go on the Burgess tutorial that I mentioned before, which I'll paste in the chat as soon as this stream ends. And that way you can serve your React application through the Express server that is set up with a safe passport that is done properly. And that way you're going to have your authentication and you're going to have your session management and all the nice stuff. So you can tell that my voice is broken. I very much appreciate your viewership. I'm going to hang out for 5 minutes to take any question. And thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to support me, you can go in the bottom of the live stream. There's a couple of things that you could do. You can buy my course, which I highly recommend. I'm very proud of the course that I built. You can go here on the complete Strapi course. It's a full stack Strapi course where I teach you basically all of Strapi, all of React, all of Gatsby, and you basically build a bunch of stuff. I also have very deep consideration for security. It's a very high priority of mine. And there's even the latest sections, which are some of the best content that I ever did. They contain also plugin development. So that may be a business opportunity for you. If you're a full stack developer, you can start by developing Strapi plugins, which are literally a new business category that is just opening up right now. So you should look into it, at least go and check it out, see if that's something that interests you. There's over 1,400 students. It has 272 ratings. The latest 50 ratings are being only 5 stars and a couple of 2 stars. So there is a few people that hate this course, but I can assure you that if you are a pragmatic person and you enjoyed my course or you enjoyed this live stream, you're gonna love this course. Super pragmatic, super practical. You build a ton of projects. It's gonna get you to the next level. My favorite review is, let's see, my favorite review. If you're a developer who knows React and want to take your skills to the next level, get this course now. I've recently graduated. I learned Node.js so I could build backends, but I hit a major roadblock. To be able to build a site that is top notch, I mean cat's pajamas, you need to know how to build REST APIs like the back of your hand. And it's very time consuming to build them. That's where Alex and Strapi come in. I'm telling you now, if you know React and takes this course on Strapi, the sky is the limit. And that's the experience of Abhikesh. There's a few other students that were able to literally improve their career, change their lives. So I'm very happy. I hope you can check it out. There's going to be a link in the description. Thank you very much. A lot of students of mine really appreciate the course. I very much appreciate your viewership. Something that I'm doing for all my students and all of my mentees is I'm inviting them to my Discord channel. I'm building a private Discord. If you don't have my course, you can get access to the Discord by supporting me via Patreon. There's a Discord tier. It's $5 a month. If you do the Discord tier, you will have access to 1 live stream a month, which means that it's not going to be like this. You're actually going to get on the call and I'm going to talk to you. So it's going to be very different. I need to put a payment block to avoid trolls basically. But if you want to be coached, you can get basically a free monthly coaching call that I would normally charge $150 an hour for $5 a month. And you also get access to the Discord, which means that you can talk to other people and engage with them. And if you send a message, I'll also answer it. There's also the $97 a month tier. This one is 1 hour of mentoring call with me that again I normally charge $160 for, so you get it for less. And you also get to be part of the Discord, and you get to be part of a special chat in the Discord with only alumni of mine, which means there are students that also did mentoring with me. So they're top tier, highly motivated students that work in some of the top companies in the world, very motivated people. So you may want to network with them as well. And you also get a weekly call on this. And if you are already a student of mine on Code Mentor, you're going to get access to this shortly. So if you're interested in supporting me, you can go at the bottom of this description, go in the bottom now, check the Patreon if you're interested, or you can just get the course and you get basically the Patreon for free. So get the course now, get the Patreon. I'm going to answer a few questions now for a few minutes. Courses are great. Thank you very much, man. The Strapi limitation, yeah, the Strapi limitation are something that a lot of people dislike. I'm pretty sure that somebody's just going to develop a way to avoid the Strapi limitation. So I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. Sure. Even if you don't know React and your JS or Angular view, you will understand it, no problem. Thank you, Retroman. Yeah, I think a lot of people really like the course because at the end of the day, like, you can do so much with Strapi with so little effort, and that's why people really enjoy it. My voice is completely destroyed, so I very much appreciate your viewership. I'm gonna cut it short now. Again, you can look at the source code here. Expect part 2 if we get to 100 likes. So like the video now if you haven't. Share it on Twitter and put like hashtag Node.js so that some bot can retweet it for me, just so that I can get some clout. I very much appreciate your viewership. I'm out. I'm gonna be on the chat for a few minutes, but thank you very much again and have an amazing day.